Hey guys, tonight we are gently tiptoeing back, way back to ancient China. Imagine a time before Wi Fi, before traffic jams, even before sliced bread. A time when the rustle of leaves and the hum of unseen insects were the loudest things around. We're exploring the delicate, almost whisper soft beginnings of silk, an invention so luxurious, so coveted, it would literally shape empires and define elegance for millennia. Now, I'll be honest, the pace of ancient craft development isn't exactly a thrill-a-minute blockbuster. Tonight, we're diving into something so soothingly detailed you probably won't make it to the end awake. And frankly, that's the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see our little community of history dozers spread across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself drifting not in your bed, but in a place where time itself seems to stretch and soften like taffy pulled by unseen hands. The air is warm, carrying the scent of unfamiliar blossoms. Perhaps the sweet perfume of plum or the delicate fragrance of lotus intermingled with the damp, earthy smell of rich soil. You are in an imperial garden, a sanctuary of meticulously arranged nature sometime around the 27th century BCE, during the legendary era of the Yellow Emperor Huangdi. Don't worry about the exact date. Ancient calendars are a headache nobody needs before bedtime. Just feel the stillness, the profound quiet that only existed before leaf blowers and distant highways. The loudest sound might be the gentle splash of water from a carved stone feature or the almost imperceptible whir of a dragonfly's wings as it investigates a cluster of peonies. Your attention is drawn to a figure seated with serene grace beneath the shade of a broad-leafed tree. This is Li Su, the principal wife of the Yellow Emperor, later known as Shi Ling Shi. She's not surrounded by a bustling retinue or the pomp you might expect. Instead, she seems lost in a moment of quiet contemplation, a small, steaming cup resting on a low stone table beside her. Perhaps she's pondering matters of state, or maybe she's simply enjoying a brief escape from the endless responsibilities of being an empress in a foundational period of Chinese civilization. We all need our quiet tea moments, even legendary figures. The tree above her is a mulberry tree. Its leaves are a vibrant green, perhaps already known for some medicinal properties, or simply for providing pleasant shade. But its true treasure, the tiny architect of its future fame, remains hidden, nestled amongst its branches in unassuming little pods. Leizu reaches for her tea. It's probably a simple infusion of local herbs or leaves, nothing like the complex varieties that would later become famous. The important thing is it's temperature hot. Steam rises in a gentle spiral, disappearing into the dappled sunlight. And then it happens. A small oval object, no bigger than your thumb, detaches itself from a mulberry branch directly above her, and with a soft plink, lands squarely in her cup. You can almost feel her slight startle a flicker of surprise, perhaps a touch of annoyance at this interruption to her peaceful ritual. Who invited this unseemly little lump to tea? She peers into the cup. The intruder is a pale, buff-colored cocoon, bobbing gently in the hot liquid. Now, Lizu wasn't doom-scrolling on a jade tablet. She was just perhaps a little bored or intensely curious by nature. And sometimes boredom plus a hot beverage leads to world-changing discoveries. Note, to self-schedule more tea breaks, skip the doom-scrolling. Instead of fishing it out immediately and flicking it away, she watches. As the cocoon soaks in the warm tea, something magical begins to occur. A fine, almost invisible thread starts to loosen to separate from the main body of the cocoon. It floats glistening on the surface of the tea. Intrigued, she reaches out perhaps with a delicate hairpin or a slender twig and touches the loosened end. She pulls gently at first, then with a little more purpose. The thread doesn't break. It keeps coming and coming, a seemingly endless filament, unspooling from the sodden cocoon. It's astonishingly long, incredibly fine, yet surprisingly strong. As it dries in the air, it shimmers with a subtle luster, a pearlescent glow that catches the light in a way no ordinary fiber could. This right here is the legendary aha moment. This isn't just some random bugs discarded home. This is something more. Her mind, you can imagine, would be racing, connecting dots that no one had connected before. This legendary account of Lizu and the teacup is the cornerstone of Silk's origin story, a charming tale that has been passed down for millennia. And while it's a beautiful narrative, it's also a personification of what was likely a much longer, more gradual process of discovery. The mainstream historical fact is that sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms and the production of raw silk from their cocoons, is an invention that unequivocally originated in China during the Neolithic period. Archaeological evidence backs this up far more concretely than a single teacup incident, however delightful. For instance, a silkworm cocoon identified as Bombyx mori, the domesticated silkworm which had been cut in half by a sharp instrument, was unearthed in Shaanxi province, and it dates back to somewhere between 4000 and 3000 BCE. Even more impressively, the earliest extant piece of silk fabric itself was discovered at a Yangshao culture site in Henan province, meticulously dated to around 3630 BCE. These silent artifacts whisper a story of silk that predates even the Yellow Emperor's traditional reign. So whether it was a single empress or a series of keen-eyed observers over generations, the discovery was made. Lei Su in the legend doesn't just stop at that one transformative cocoon. Her curiosity ignited, she would have investigated further. You can picture her perhaps with a few trusted attendants gathering more cocoons from the mulberry trees. She would have studied the fat white caterpillars, the Bombyx mori silkworms, munching contentedly on the mulberry leaves, oblivious to their precious secret. She would observe them spinning their silken sleeping bags, preparing for their transformation. Historians still argue whether Lei Su was a singular historical figure directly responsible for this monumental discovery, or if the name Lei Su serves as a symbolic representation, a convenient way to credit one person for what might have been generations of anonymous experimentation and observation by many early Chinese people. Some academics also continue to debate the precise timeline of early sericulture, suggesting that the use of wild silk from other moth species might have occurred even before the focused cultivation of Bombyx mori, whose continuous filament was far superior. Imagine the initial attempts at unraveling these cocoons without the benefit of centuries of refined techniques. It must have been a messy, frustrating process. This is where our first light joke comes in. Imagine the first few attempts, probably more like deconstructed cocoon art than actual thread. A sticky, buggy mess fit for a very confused bird's nest with bits of larvae, adding an unwelcome, shall we say, organic element. The patience required must have been immense. You can't just yank the thread. It demands a gentle, persistent touch, a skill learned through countless failures. The hot water, as in Lei Su's tea, proved crucial, as it helps to dissolve the sericin, the gummy substance that binds the cocoon together, allowing that single precious thread to be reeled off. The legend, of course, streamlines this. Lei Su is not only credited with discovering silk, but also with inventing the silk loom, and teaching her people the entire art of sericulture, from raising the worms to weaving the fabric. That's a pretty packed CV for one person, but legends are all about impact, not detailed process charts. The reality was likely a slower burn, a gradual accumulation of knowledge. Now, for a quirky tidbit, ancient Chinese texts provide glimpses into how revered and protected this burgeoning knowledge became. The silkworm itself was often referred to with affectionate and respectful terms like the little treasure or even the heavenly worm. Strict protocols and even rituals often surrounded its care and the harvesting of its precious gift. For a very long time, the intricate processes of silk production were a closely guarded secret primarily managed and executed by women. Some historical interpretations suggest that for a significant period, only women were permitted to be involved in the delicate tasks of raising silkworms, reeling the silk and weaving the fabric. Men were apparently kept at a respectful distance. You can almost picture an imperial edict on the door of the silk workshop. Silkworm sanctuary, no boys allowed. Seriously, by order of the Empress. Whether this was due to the work being seen as inherently suited to feminine dexterity, or a clever strategy to ensure the secret remained within a tight knit community, it adds a fascinating layer to silk's early days. Think about what these first silk threads might have been used for. While we immediately picture shimmering imperial robes and luxurious tapestries, the initial applications were likely far more utilitarian. Silk is incredibly strong for its weight and fineness. So, before it adorned emperors, it might have been used for durable fishing lines. Can you imagine the upgrade from whatever they were using before? Suddenly, you're not losing the big one. Our second joke moment. Early adopters weren't necessarily fashionistas. They were probably just really, really tired of their fishing lines snapping. Necessity, the mother of very fancy invention. It could have been twisted into strings for musical instruments, lending a new resonance to ancient melodies. Or perhaps even used for resilient bowstrings, giving archers an edge. Its practical value, its sheer utility, might have been the first quality to be widely recognized even before its unparalleled aesthetic appeal for complex garments was fully explored and developed. You watch as Lisu, or the collective of early innovators she represents, begins to understand the potential held within these shimmering strands. Each cocoon, you learn, can yield a continuous thread up to 900 meters or nearly 3,000 feet long. That's astounding. Try to picture it, a single unbroken filament stretching the length of nearly 10 football fields, all produced by one industrious little caterpillar. The sheer wonder of this must have been palpable. The process of domesticating the Bombax mori silkworm was also a critical step. Wild silkworms exist, but their cocoons are often chewed through by the emerging moth, breaking the precious long filament. The domesticated silkworm, through generations of selective breeding, often doesn't emerge from its cocoon in the same way, or is harvested before it can, thus preserving the integrity of the silk thread. This human intervention, this partnership with a humble insect, was key to China's silk monopoly for millennia. And you thought your cat playing with a ball of yarn was chaotic, right? Imagine a room perhaps not filled with empresses, but dedicated workers trying to figure out how to untangle and process thousands of these delicate moth house strings simultaneously. There would have been imperial oopsies tangles that would make your worst headphone not look like a simple slip knot, and probably a lot of collective sighs before the techniques were perfected. The development of the reel, a device to unwind the cocoons efficiently, and the loom to weave these threads into fabric, were monumental technological advancements in their own right, born from this initial serendipitous discovery. The light in the garden begins to soften as the sun continues its arc across the sky. The empress, her mind buzzing with the implications of this lustrous fiber, carefully gathers the unraveled thread. It's more than just a curiosity now, it's a promise. A promise of beauty, of innovation, of a material that will distinguish her culture and her land for thousands of years to come. This moment, this accidental dunking of a cocoon in a cup of tea, whether it happened exactly like this or was a more drawn-out affair of observation and trial, is the gentle genesis of a global phenomenon. It's the quiet starting point of a journey that will eventually see silk, traversing vast deserts and oceans, becoming a symbol of ultimate luxury and even a form of currency. But for now, here in this tranquil garden, it's just a woman, a tree, and a tiny insect's incredible gift. The air is still thick with the scent of blossoms and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of potential. The true work, the painstaking effort of understanding the silkworm's life cycle, of perfecting its cultivation, of turning these delicate filaments into enduring art, is only just beginning. You feel a sense of quiet anticipation, knowing that this is but the first soft whisper of a much larger, more intricate story that is about to unfold, thread by patient thread. That quiet anticipation you felt in the Empress's garden now draws you forward deeper into the nascent world of silk. The initial spark of discovery, that serendipitous moment with Leisu in the teacup, has ignited a patient, meticulous endeavor, the understanding and cultivation of the architect of that shimmering thread, the silkworm itself. You move from the imperial leisure of a sun-dappled garden to the hushed, purposeful atmosphere of the spaces dedicated to sericulture, the raising of these precious creatures. The air here is different. It's thick with the unique, slightly sweet green scent of countless mulberry leaves, overlaid with the faintest, almost indescribable animal musk of the worms themselves. It's not unpleasant, just specific. Like the smell of a well kept library, but for insects. Your focus narrows to the star of this miniature opera, the Bombex mori. This isn't just any caterpillar, it's a marvel of domestication, a creature so specialized, so intertwined with human history that it has become entirely reliant on our care. This is a key historical fact. The Bombyx mori silkworm, as we know it from ancient China onwards, is a fully domesticated species. It does not exist in the wild. Millennia of selective breeding have rendered the adult moth flightless, virtually blind, and stripped of its camouflage. It waits patiently for its human keepers to facilitate mating, to collect its eggs, and to tend its offspring. It's a tiny living testament to human ingenuity and the profound impact we can have on the natural world, a partnership forged in the pursuit of beauty and utility. Remember that wild ancestor, the Bombyx mandarina. This domesticated version is its highly specialized descendant, a silk-producing virtuoso that traded its wild independence for a life of catered comfort and a singular purpose. The journey of silk begins not with a worm, but with an egg almost impossibly small, like a fleck of dust or a tiny grain of sand. You see them perhaps stored carefully in cool, dry pottery jars through the colder months, awaiting the precise moment to be brought into the warmth. These are not just any old insect eggs. Their viability and synchronized hatching are crucial for an efficient silk harvest. Ancient sericulturists became masters of environmental control, understanding that the eggs needed specific temperatures and humidity to awaken from their dormant state. They would wake the eggs in carefully warmed rooms, a process that had to be timed perfectly with the first budding of the mulberry trees. Too early, and the ravenous larvae would hatch with no food. Too late, and a precious part of the growing season would be lost. And then the magic of emergence. From these tiny specks, the first stage larvae, known as cago, or sometimes poetically as antlions due to their minuscule size and dark color, would hatch. Thousands upon thousands of them, a wriggling carpet of new life, all sharing one overwhelming singular desire to eat. And not just anything. They are the ultimate picky eaters. Their diet consists exclusively of fresh mulberry leaves. You witness them being transferred to flat woven trays, often made of bamboo, where they are met with a feast of finely chopped, tender young leaves. It's like having thousands upon thousands of tiny, very demanding vegan babies who only eat one specific freshly picked artisanal green. And they probably would complain if it wasn't chopped, just so if they could, vocalize beyond a general enthusiastic munching. The sound in these rearing rooms is a constant, gentle rustle, a soft, pervasive chewing, that when multiplied by tens of thousands is often described as sounding like gentle rainfall on a roof. It's a soothing, hypnotic sound, the soundtrack to creation. The worms are eating machines. Their entire existence at this stage is dedicated to consuming mulberry leaves and growing at an astonishing rate. Their caretakers, traditionally women whose patience and gentle touch were deemed essential for this delicate work, are in constant motion. They must supply an ever-increasing quantity of fresh leaves carefully selected and often wiped clean of any dew or contaminants. The worms' appetites are legendary. They can eat many times their own weight in leaves each day, and with all that eating comes inevitably a lot of, frass, which is the polite term for insect droppings. Meticulous cleanliness is paramount. The trays must be cleaned regularly to prevent the buildup of frass and old wilted leaves, which could foster diseases disastrous to the vulnerable silkworms. You see the women carefully transferring the worms to fresh beds of leaves, often using feathers or fine nets, their movements practiced and economical. Any sickness could sweep through a population with devastating speed. So hygiene was not just a nicety, it was critical to the entire operation. As the days pass, the silkworms grow visibly, their bodies plumping, their skin stretching. They will molt, shedding their skin typically 4 times during their larval stage. Each molt is a vulnerable period, after which they emerge larger and with an even more voracious appetite. The you in this sleepy journey watches them transform from tiny black specks to pale, creamy white caterpillars, their segmented bodies thick and almost translucent, revealing the green tint of their mulberry diet within. They become, quite frankly, impressively chubby little eating machines. After about a month of this relentless feasting and growth, a period that could vary depending on temperature and leaf quality, a change comes over the worms. They stop eating. They may become restless, their bodies turning a more translucent yellow. This is the signal that they are ready to enter the next phase of their lives, spinning their cocoon. You see them being carefully transferred from their feeding trays to what are called mountages or cocooning frames. In the earliest days, these might have been simple bundles of straw or twigs, but later more elaborate frames with individual compartments were developed to encourage perfectly shaped cocoons. The worm, guided by instinct, will search for a suitable spot, a nook or cranny in the mountain to begin its incredible work. And then the spinning starts. From a specialized gland called the spinneret located just below its mouth, the silkworm extrudes two fine streams of fibro in a protein that will form the silk thread. These two streams are cemented together by serrated a gummy protein as they emerge. On contact with the air, this liquid silk hardens into a continuous filament. The worm, with a characteristic figure-8 motion of its head, begins to weave this filament around itself, constructing its protective silken shell. It's a slow, painstaking process. The worm will work continuously for several days, laying down hundreds of thousands of these precise loops, creating a dense, multi-layered structure. It's an act of natural engineering that is simply breathtaking to witness even in your drowsy state. A single worm producing a single unbroken thread that can stretch for hundreds of meters. Now, for a quirky or perhaps rather reverent tidbit about this process. Ancient Chinese culture held the silkworm and its craft in very high esteem, and this translated into specific practices. Some historical accounts and folklore suggest that silkworm rearing houses were maintained with an almost sacred level of quietness and purity. Loud noises, strong smells like garlic, or certain perfumes worn by attendants, or even emotional disturbances, were believed to stress the delicate worms and negatively impact the quality or quantity of the silk produced. Attendants were expected to be clean, calm, and even to abstain from certain foods. Sometimes prayers and offerings were made to deities associated with sericulture, like Kannu, the silkworm mother, or horse-headed lady, a goddess believed to have introduced silkworms to humanity. Imagine these hushed rooms full of gently rustling leaves and the almost silent labor of the worms, the air kept pure, the human presence gentle and unobtrusive. It's a far cry from a modern factory floor. Inside its newly completed cocoon, the larva transforms into a pupa. This is the chrysalis stage where the metamorphosis into an adult moth would naturally occur. However, for silk production, this is where the silkworm's life cycle is typically and gently interrupted. If the moth were allowed to emerge, it would secrete an alkaline enzyme to dissolve a hole through one end of the cocoon, breaking that precious continuous filament into shorter, less valuable pieces. So the cocoons destined for reeling are harvested with the pupa still inside. Usually a select few are allowed to mature fully to ensure the next generation of silkworm eggs, but the vast majority are processed to obtain the silk. This brings us to an area of ongoing discussion. Historians still argue whether the earliest forms of sericulture involved a sophisticated understanding of the Bombyx mori's entire life cycle from the outset, or if it began more opportunistically. Perhaps early silk gatherers simply collected wild cocoons, including those from which the moth had already emerged, and painstakingly tried to piece together the shorter fibers. Or there's ongoing discussion among scholars about the exact timing and methods by which Bombyx mandarina, the wild silk moth, believed to be the ancestor of the domesticated version, was brought into a controlled environment, and how rapidly its complete dependence on human husbandry evolved. The leap from foraging for wild silk to the controlled large-scale farming of a domesticated species represents a significant technological and conceptual shift. You can't help but be struck by the deep reverence embedded in this entire process. The care lavished on these tiny creatures was extraordinary. You thought helicopter parenting was intense? Ancient Chinese silkworm farmers were on another level. Temperature checks, gourmet leaf delivery mood lighting. Well, maybe not mood lighting as we know it, but definitely controlled environments. It was a combination of empirical science learned through generations of observation and a kind of gentle, almost spiritual partnership with nature. Diseases like muscardine, which could turn a silkworm chalky and stiff, or various forms of pebrine, were constant threats, and only through meticulous attention could a healthy crop of cocoons be ensured. The women who were the custodians of this knowledge, who day after day tended to these fragile lives, were performing work that was foundational to their culture's wealth and identity. They weren't just farming insects, they were nurturing the raw material of an art form, an economic powerhouse, and a symbol of civilization. The silkworms themselves, as we've noted, were the ultimate picky eaters. If the mulberry leaves weren't absolutely perfect, not too old, not too young, not wet, not dirty, they'd likely, just metaphorically speaking, turn up their tiny noses and go on a hunger strike. Imagine the pressure on the leaf harvesters. This fussiness, however, ensured that the silk produced was of the highest quality as the worm's health, and the silk's properties are directly linked to their diet. As you observe this world of diligent care, you realize that the silkworm, for all its biological wonder, is only one half of a crucial partnership. Its existence, its ability to produce that magical thread, is entirely dependent on another equally important player, the mulberry tree. Without its specific leaves, there are no silkworms, and thus no silk. The story of silk is inextricably bound to the story of this unassuming tree, and it's to the quiet, rustling groves of mulberry that our sleepy journey will drift next, exploring how this vital resource was cultivated and managed to feed an entire industry. For now, just let the gentle rhythmic sound of thousands of tiny silkworms chewing their way into history lull you deeper into your rest. You find yourself now standing at the edge of a vast, orderly expanse of green. These are the mulberry groves, the silent, indispensable partners in the creation of silk. The air here is fresh, carrying the clean, slightly sharp scent of crushed mulberry leaves, and the soft rustle of wind through countless branches creates a soothing, whispering chorus. Without these trees, specifically the white mulberry Morus alba, the entire enterprise of sericulture as you've witnessed it would be impossible. The Bombyx mori silkworm, in its long history of domestication, has become an obligate feeder on mulberry leaves. It's a culinary devotion that borders on obsession. No other leaf will do. You walk between the rows of carefully tended trees. They are not wild, untamed giants, but rather cultivated specifically for leaf production. Many are pruned to be more like bushes, kept at a manageable height to make harvesting easier and to encourage the growth of tender young leaves, the silkworm's preferred delicacy. This isn't just haphazard farming. It's a specialized form of agriculture refined over centuries to maximize the yield of perfect silkworm fodder. You can see the gnarled trunks of older trees, evidence of years of pruning and care, standing alongside younger, more vigorous saplings. The Chinese, even in these ancient times, understood crop rotation, soil enrichment, and the importance of selecting the best mulberry strains for leaf quality and resilience. The cultivation of Morus alba is a mainstream historical fact that underpins the entirety of silk history. Its leaves provided the essential nutrients for the silkworms, but the tree was valuable in other ways too. Its bark could be used for making paper, its fruit was edible and used for making wine or jams, and various parts of the tree, from roots to leaves, held a place in traditional Chinese medicine. So, planting mulberry was an investment that paid dividends beyond just silk. It spread across Asia and eventually the world, often directly mirrored the path of silk production itself. Where silk went, the mulberry tree was sure to follow a quiet pioneer. Imagine the sheer scale of these groves. To feed the astronomical numbers of silkworms required for any significant silk production, vast tracts of land would need to be dedicated to mulberry cultivation. This would have had a profound impact on land use, agricultural planning, and even the landscape itself. In some regions, mulberry groves would have dominated the scenery, a sea of green, testifying to the importance of the silk industry. These weren't just pretty trees, they were the engine room of an economic powerhouse. Your attention is drawn to the process of harvesting. It's not a rough tearing of branches. Instead, you see figures moving methodically through the groves, carefully plucking individual leaves or stripping small branches with a practiced hand. The leaves must be fresh, clean, and of the correct maturity. Younger silkworms, the kigo you met earlier, require the most tender, finely chopped young leaves. As they grow, they can handle slightly older, larger leaves. The timing of the harvest is crucial, often done in the cool of the early morning to ensure the leaves are at their freshest, perhaps with a hint of dew still clinging to them, though they'd be carefully wiped before being offered to the discerning worms. These silkworms, they weren't just foodies, they were leaf connoisseurs. You can almost imagine them having tiny rating systems sending back leaves that weren't perfectly dappled by morning dew, or that had a blemish from an errant insect. Of course, cultivating these vital groves wasn't without its challenges. The trees, like any crop, were susceptible to pests and diseases. A blight on the mulberry trees could be just as devastating as a disease among the silkworms. Droughts could stunt leaf growth, frost could damage young shoots, and locust swarms could decimate a grove in hours. Protecting this precious food source required constant vigilance, traditional forms of pest control, perhaps involving a lot of stern looks and manually picking off offending bugs and a deep understanding of the local environment. Forget a beware of dog sign. These groves probably had beware of disgruntled silkworm farmer if you mess with these trees signs written in very stern calligraphy. Now, for a quirky tidbit related to these essential trees. In Chinese culture, the mulberry tree itself is imbued with symbolic meaning, sometimes associated with life, family, and the homeland. Beyond its practical use, it appears in poetry and folklore. For instance, there's the mythical Fuzong tree, often described as a giant mulberry tree of otherworldly proportions. Located in the east, where the sun or suns in some myths, there were 10 were said to reside or begin their daily journey across the sky. While the working groves were very much of this earth, such mythological associations might have added another layer of respect or even reverence for the humble mulberry that fed the heavenly worms. Perhaps some families who had cultivated mulberry for generations had their own secret pruning techniques or specific rituals performed at planting time to ensure bountiful harvests passed down like precious heirlooms. Historians still argue whether the intensive, large-scale cultivation of mulberry was primarily a cause that enabled the growth of sericulture, or if it was a consequence with cultivation methods rapidly developing and expanding only after the economic and cultural value of silk became widely recognized. It's a bit of a chicken and egg debate. Did the ability to grow vast amounts of mulberry kickstart the silk boom? Or did the demand for silk drive innovation in mulberry farming? Likely, it was a synergistic process, each fueling the other's development. Think of the sheer human effort involved. Imagine your entire job, day in and day out during the season, is picking leaves. Not even the fun ones with spectacular autumn colors that you might press in a book. Just green, green, and more green. You'd dream of leaves. You'd see leaves when you closed your eyes. Your social media feed, if such a thing had existed in ancient China, perhaps a series of beautifully brushed scrolls passed among friends, would just be filled with "Ya mulberry life" and "Yellow leaf haul." The dedication is astounding. You feel the texture of a freshly plucked leaf. Smooth on one side, slightly rougher on the other, with prominent veins. You smell that characteristic green, slightly tannic aroma. The sun filters through the leaves, creating a shifting pattern of light and shadow on the ground. The work is repetitive, yes, but there's a quiet dignity to it. These meticulous farmers, these leaf gatherers, are the unsung heroes of the silk story. Without their labor, their knowledge, their resilience against the challenges of nature, the silkworms would starve, the looms would fall silent, and the world would be a far less lustrous place. As the day in the groves draws to a close, you see baskets overflowing with freshly picked leaves being carried away, destined for the hungry mouths you encountered earlier. The cycle continues. The trees provide the worms, consume and transform, and soon those precious cocoons, the culmination of all this leafy effort, will be ready for the next stage of their journey. You take one last look at the serene, undulating green of the mulberry plantations, a quiet testament to nature harnessed by human ingenuity, before your sleepy consciousness drifts towards the destiny of those very cocoons. The journey from leaf to silken treasure continues, and you find yourself now transitioning from the verdant mulberry groves to the next critical phase, the unraveling of the cocoon. The silkworms fattened on those perfect leaves have meticulously spun their silken fortresses. And now it's time to gently coax forth the precious material within. You're entering a place of warmth, steam, and focused activity. The air is humid, carrying the faint, unique scent of wet silk and heated sarafan. A smell that's not unpleasant, perhaps a bit like simmering porridge, but distinctly its own. Before the magical unraveling can begin, there's a crucial sorting process. You observe piles of newly harvested cocoons. They are surprisingly firm to the touch, yet incredibly lightweight. Workers, often women with years of experience in their fingertips, quickly sort them. Size color most are a creamy white, but some breeds produce yellowish or even faintly greenish cocoons, and quality are all assessed. Damaged cocoons, or those that are too thin, might be set aside for other uses, perhaps for padding, or producing lesser quality floss silk. Double cocoons, where two worms have rather inconsiderately decided to spin their homes together, are also separated as they are notoriously difficult to reel into a single continuous thread. It's an early form of quality control essential for ensuring the consistency of the final silk thread. The next step is a critical one, and perhaps a little somber if you think about it. Too much, but utterly necessary for obtaining that prized unbroken filament. The pupa inside the cocoon must be stifled or killed before it can metamorphose into a moth and chew its way out, breaking the continuous thread. This is typically done with heat. You might see trays of cocoons being placed in ovens or exposed to blasts of hot steam. It's a swift process ensuring the silk's integrity. While it's the end of the line for the pupa, let's just try to focus on the fact that it achieved nirvana a bit ahead of schedule. All for the greater good of fabulous fabrics, of course. A few cocoons, the finest specimens, are always set aside, allowed to mature so the moths can emerge, mate, and lay the eggs for the next generation of silkworms. This ensures the cycle of life in silk continues. Once stifled and sorted, the cocoons are ready for their bath. You see them being tipped into basins of hot steaming water. This isn't just for cleaning. The hot water plays a vital role in softening the sarafan, that natural gum that binds the silk filaments together in the cocoon. As the sarafan softens, it allows the incredibly fine individual filaments to be separated and unwound. Now comes a task requiring immense delicacy and patience, finding the end of the thread. Each cocoon, remember, is made of a single continuous filament. But finding that starting point among a mass of softened, floating cocoons is an art. You watch as workers use small, gentle brushes or even just their nimble fingers to lightly agitate the cocoons bobbing in the hot water. Tiny, almost invisible filaments loosen and float to the surface. This is it, the beginning of the golden thread. Finding that first thread end on a cocoon in hot water. It's like trying to find the end of the sticky tape roll in the dark, only wetter, much finer, and with significantly higher stakes for your ancient Chinese GDP. And you have to do it for thousands upon thousands of them. With the ends found, the reeling process begins. This is where the true magic of transforming a bug's house into a luxurious thread happens. Early reeling setups were simple, often just an earthenware basin for the hot water and a hand-turned wooden reel. You observe a reeler, her hands a blur of practiced motion. She gathers the filaments from several cocoons, typically between 4 to 8, though it can vary. These individual filaments are incredibly fine, too, delicate on their own for most purposes. By combining them, a single stronger, more uniform thread of raw silk is created. As one cocoon is nearly exhausted, she seamlessly adds a new filament from another cocoon into the twisted strand, ensuring the thickness of the reeled thread remains remarkably consistent. This requires incredible skill, judging the thickness by touch and sight, all while the reel is turning and new cocoons are being constantly introduced. The women doing this were the original multitaskers, keeping maybe 8 nearly invisible threads from breaking or tangling, adding new cocoons at just the right moment, all while probably humming a gentle tune or sharing the day's news. It's Olympic-level dexterity, truly. The invention and refinement of the silk reel is a mainstream historical fact of immense importance. From simple hand-crank devices, the technology evolved. By the Song Dynasty 9-6 to 1279 CE, quite sophisticated multi-spindle reeling frames were in use, some even ingeniously powered by water, which dramatically increased the efficiency of raw silk production. These machines allowed one person to reel threads from many cocoons, simultaneously, a significant leap in productivity. But here in these earlier times, you're witnessing the skill is very much in the hands of the individual. The freshly reeled silk, glistening with moisture, is wound onto a revolving reel, forming large hanks or skeins. You see these skeins of raw silk being removed their color, a beautiful creamy white or pale gold, glowing with that characteristic natural luster that no other fiber can quite replicate. They are soft, yet you can sense their underlying strength. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The water in those reeling basins, now rich with dissolved sericin from the boiled cocoons, wasn't always just thrown away. Ceridin, it turns out, has emollient and moisturizing properties. It's said that the women who spent their days with their hands in this sericin-rich water often had incredibly soft, smooth skin on their hands, despite the otherwise arduous nature of their work. Perhaps it was an unintended but welcome cosmetic perk of the job. A little spa treatment amidst the steam and labor. Some traditions also held superstitions about the reeling process, such as avoiding arguments or negative speech near the reeling basins lest the silk threads become tangled or break, reflecting the almost sacred respect for the material. There's a point of scholarly debate here. Scholars continue to debate the exact point at which reeling multiple cocoons simultaneously to form a single thread became standard practice, as this innovation significantly improved the quality, strength, and efficiency of raw silk production compared to the more painstaking method of attempting to reel from single cocoons. The transition to multi-cocoon reeling was a game changer, but pinpointing its origin and widespread adoption is complex. Furthermore, the specific methods for stifling pupae in the earliest periods, and whether less destructive from the pupa's perspective, but still effective methods were ever widely explored or used in ancient times, remains a topic of some historical inquiry and ethical reflection for modern observers. You watch the rhythmic turning of the reels, the almost hypnotic dance of threads emerging from the steamy water, converging and winding into those beautiful, lustrous skeins. The air is filled with the gentle clatter of the reels, the splash of water, and the low hum of activity. It's a process that bridges the natural world of the silkworm with the human world of craft and industry. Each skein of raw silk represents not just the work of countless silkworms, but also the accumulated knowledge, skill, and patient labor of generations of human ingenuity. These skeins of raw silk, gleaming softly in the ambient light, are not yet the finished product, not by a long shot. They are the precious raw material, the promise of even greater beauty to come. The journey of these threads is far from over. Next, they must be further prepared, twisted, and refined, transforming them from mere filaments into yarns ready to receive vibrant dyes, and to be woven into the fabrics that will dazzle a world. For now, you let the image of those glowing skeins in the warm, humid air lull you as the story of silk prepares to spin its next chapter. The journey from leaf to silken treasure continues, and you find yourself now transitioning from the verdant mulberry groves to the next critical phase, the unraveling of the cocoon. The silkworms fattened on those perfect leaves have meticulously spun their silken fortresses, and now it's time to gently coax forth the precious material within. You're entering a place of warmth, steam, and focused activity. The air is humid, carrying the faint, unique scent of wet silk and heated cerutin, a smell that's not unpleasant, perhaps a bit like simmering porridge, but distinctly its own. Before the magical unraveling can begin, there's a crucial sorting process. You observe piles of newly harvested cocoons. They are surprisingly firm to the touch, yet incredibly lightweight. Workers, often women with years of experience in their fingertips, quickly sort them. Size color most are a creamy white, but some breeds produce yellowish or even faintly greenish cocoons, and quality are all assessed. Damaged cocoons, or those that are too thin, might be set aside for other uses, perhaps for padding or producing lesser quality floss silk. Double cocoons, where two worms have rather inconsiderately decided to spin their homes together, are also separated, as they are notoriously difficult to reel into a single continuous thread. It's an early form of quality control essential for ensuring the consistency of the final silk thread. The next step is a critical one, and perhaps a little somber if you think about it too much, but utterly necessary for obtaining that prized unbroken filament. The pupa inside the cocoon must be stifled or killed before it can metamorphose into a moth and chew its way out, breaking the continuous thread. This is typically done with heat. You might see trays of cocoons being placed in ovens or exposed to blasts of hot steam. It's a swift process ensuring the silk's integrity. While it's the end of the line for the pupa, let's just try to focus on the fact that it achieved nirvana a bit ahead of schedule. All for the greater good of fabulous fabrics, of course. A few cocoons, the finest specimens, are always set aside, allowed to mature so the moths can emerge mate and lay the eggs for the next generation of silkworms. This ensures the cycle of life in silk continues. Once stifled and sorted, the cocoons are ready for their bath. You see them being tipped into basins of hot, steaming water. This isn't just for cleaning. The hot water plays a vital role in softening the saracen, that natural gum that binds the silk filaments together in the cocoon. As the saracen softens, it allows the incredibly fine individual filaments to be separated and unwound. Now comes a task requiring immense delicacy and patience, finding the end of the thread. Each cocoon, remember, is made of a single continuous filament, but finding that starting point among a mass of softened, floating cocoons is an art. You watch as workers use small, gentle brushes, or even just their nimble fingers to lightly agitate the cocoons, bobbing in the hot water. Tiny, almost invisible filaments loosen and float to the surface. This is it, the beginning of the golden thread. Finding that first thread end on a cocoon in hot water, it's like trying to find the end of the sticky tape roll in the dark, only wetter, much finer, and with significantly higher stakes for your ancient Chinese GDP. And you have to do it for thousands upon thousands of them. With the ends found, the reeling process begins. This is where the true magic of transforming a bug's house into a luxurious thread happens. Early reeling setups were simple, often just an earthenware basin for the hot water and a hand-turned wooden reel. You observe a reeler, her hands a blur of practiced motion. She gathers the filaments from several cocoons, typically between 4 to 8, though it can vary. These individual filaments are incredibly fine, too delicate on their own for most purposes. By combining them, a single, stronger, more uniform thread of raw silk is created. As one cocoon is nearly exhausted, she seamlessly adds a new filament from another cocoon into the twisted strand, ensuring the thickness of the reeled thread remains remarkably consistent. This requires incredible skill, judging the thickness by touch and sight, all while the reel is turning and new cocoons are being constantly introduced. The women doing this were the original multitaskers, keeping maybe 8 nearly invisible threads from breaking or tangling, adding new cocoons at just the right moment, all while probably humming a gentle tune or sharing the day's news. It's Olympic-level dexterity, truly. The invention and refinement of the silk reel is a mainstream historical fact of immense importance. From simple hand-crank devices, the technology evolved. By the Song Dynasty 960 to 1279 CE, quite sophisticated multi-spindle reeling frames were in use, some even ingeniously powered by water, which dramatically increased the efficiency of raw silk production. These machines allowed one person to reel threads from many cocoons simultaneously, a significant leap in productivity. But here in these earlier times, you're witnessing the skill is very much in the hands of the individual. The freshly reeled silk, glistening with moisture, is wound onto a revolving reel, forming large hanks or skeins. You see these skeins of raw silk being removed, their color a beautiful creamy white or pale gold, glowing with that characteristic natural luster that no other fiber can quite replicate. They are soft, yet you can sense their underlying strength. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The water in those reeling basins, now rich with dissolved saracen from the boiled cocoons, wasn't always just thrown away. Saracen, it turns out, has emollient and moisturizing properties. It's said that the women who spent their days with their hands in this saracen-rich water often had incredibly soft, smooth skin on their hands, despite the otherwise arduous nature of their work. Perhaps it was an unintended but welcome cosmetic perk of the job, a little spa treatment amidst the steam and labor. Some traditions also held superstitions about the reeling process, such as avoiding arguments or negative speech near the reeling basins, lest the silk threads become tangled or break, reflecting the almost sacred respect for the material. There's a point of scholarly debate here. Scholars continue to debate the exact point at which reeling multiple cocoons simultaneously to form a single thread became standard practice as this innovation significantly improved the quality, strength, and efficiency of raw silk production, compared to the more painstaking method of attempting to reel from single cocoons. The transition to multi-cocoon reeling was a game changer, but pinpointing its origin and widespread adoption is complex. Furthermore, the specific methods for stifling pupae in the earliest periods and whether less destructive from the pupa's perspective but still effective methods were ever widely explored or used in ancient times remains a topic of some historical inquiry and ethical reflection for modern observers. You watch the rhythmic turning of the reels, the almost hypnotic dance of threads emerging from the steamy water, converging and winding into those beautiful, lustrous skeins. The air is filled with the gentle clatter of the reels, the splash of water, and the low hum of activity. It's a process that bridges the natural world of the silkworm with the human world of craft and industry. Each skein of raw silk represents not just the work of countless silkworms, but also the accumulated knowledge, skill, and patient labor of generations of human ingenuity. These skeins of raw silk, gleaming softly in the ambient light, are not yet the finished product, not by a long shot. They are the precious raw material, the promise of even greater beauty to come. The journey of these threads is far from over. Next, they must be further prepared, twisted, and refined, transforming them from mere filaments into yarns ready to receive vibrant dyes and to be woven into the fabrics that will dazzle a world. For now, you let the image of those glowing skeins and the warm, humid air lull you as the story of silk prepares to spin its next chapter. You drift now from the somewhat mechanical, rhythmic world of silk, throwing into a space that assaults your senses in a completely different way. This is the domain of the dyer and ancient alchemist, transforming pale, unassuming yarns into vibrant declarations of status, emotion, and belief. The air here is a complex tapestry of smells. The earthy aroma of roots and barks, simmering in vat in one, the occasional sharp tang of vinegar or stale urine, sometimes used as a source of ammonia for certain dye processes, believe it or not. Perhaps even a faint, surprising floral note from crushed petals or a pungent, almost metallic scent from mineral pigments. Your eyes are met with a kaleidoscope of hues. Skeins of freshly dyed silk hang in shimmering curtains from rafters, dripping their jewel-toned excess into collection pots below, and the hands and aprons of the workers are irrevocably stained with the colors of their craft. Color in ancient China wasn't just decoration, it was a language. Yellow, the color of the earth in the Central Plains, became sacred to the emperor, a hue often forbidden to others. Red, vibrant, and fiery, spoke of joy, good fortune, and celebration. Black, the color of the northern sky, and deep waters could symbolize mystery, heaven, or solemnity. White, the absence of applied color, was often associated with purity, but also with mourning and ghosts. Green, the color of burgeoning life, represented spring and growth. Blue from the steadfast indigo plant was a color of tranquility and immortality. The ability to imbue silk, already a luxuriate, with rich, lasting color, elevated its status even further. You watch as hanks of prepared silk yarn those beautifully thrown threads you saw earlier are brought into the dye house. The dyer, a figure of considerable skill and secret knowledge, consults what amounts to an unwritten encyclopedia of recipes. Some of these ancient dye recipes sound a bit like a witch's brew. A handful of this root, a measure of crush that insect. A specific type of clay all simmered gently for hours, maybe even days under a particular phase of the moon if local superstition dictated. You half expect them to start chanting double, double toil and trouble over the bubbling, strangely colored cauldrons. The dyes themselves are derived entirely from the natural world, a testament to centuries of patient experimentation. For blues, the undisputed king is indigo from the leaves of plants like Indigofera tinctoria or Polygonum tinctorium. The process to extract the blue pigment is complex, involving fermentation, oxidation, and a deep understanding of chemistry, even if they didn't call it that. Reds could come from madder root Rubia cordifolia, which yields a range of hues from pink to deep crimson depending on the mordant and technique. Safflower petals offered vibrant yellows and reds, though the reds were notoriously fugitive, fading in sunlight. For yellows, gardenia fruits, pagoda tree buds, and amarcork tree bark were staples. Purple's a notoriously difficult color to achieve and often associated with royalty or high status in many cultures. Could be coaxed from Cromwell root or certain lichens. Browns and blacks were often achieved using tannins from oak galls or sumac, frequently combined with iron-rich mud or water. And yes, insects played their part like dye from an encrustation, produced by the last insect Cariolaca, provided rich red and crimson shades similar to the kermes used in other parts of the ancient world. But the dye alone is often not enough. This brings us to the crucial role of mordants. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Chinese dyers were masters in the use of mordants, substances that help the dye molecules bind effectively to the silk fibers, improving color fastness, and often altering the final shade. Silk, being a protein fiber, actually takes dye relatively well, but mordants were the secret weapon for achieving a broader palette and more enduring colors. Common mordants included alum potassium aluminum sulfate, which was often mined or derived from certain plants. Iron salts, perhaps from rusty water, or by dissolving iron in vinegar, and tannins from various plant sources. The same dye bath could produce dramatically different colors on silk, depending on the mordant used before, during, or after dyeing. For instance, madder could give a bright red with an alum mordant, but a purplish or brownish red with an iron mordant. This knowledge was hard-won and often jealously guarded. Official records from as early as the Zhou dynasty, such as the Rites of Zhou, Zhou Li, even list specialized imperial officials in charge of dyeing, indicating its importance and the level of organization involved. You observe the process. Skeins of silk are carefully wetted out, then perhaps simmered in a mordant solution. After rinsing, they are immersed in the dye bath itself. The vats bubble gently over slow fires. The dyer stirs the yarn with long wooden poles, ensuring even penetration of the color. The silk might be dipped multiple times, dried in between, to achieve deeper, more saturated shades. It's a slow, almost meditative process. Sometimes you might see early forms of resist dyeing where parts of the yarn or even woven fabric are tied, clamped or coated with a resist paste like wax or clay before dyeing. When the resist is removed, it leaves behind undyed patterns, the ancient precursor to techniques like tie-dye or batik. Achieving consistent and lasting color was a monumental achievement. Early attempts at dyeing probably meant your fancy imperial yellow robe turned a rather disappointing shade of sad, streaky beige if you got caught in an unexpected shower. Highly embarrassing for an emperor, you'd imagine. So the development of effective mordanting and dyeing techniques was not just about aesthetics. It was about reliability and upholding the symbolic power of color. The dyers themselves must have had permanently rainbow-colored hands. Forget subtle manicures. Their entire fingers, probably up to their elbows, were vibrant, multi-hued fashion statements, badges of their profession. And the skill involved in matching a color, or achieving a very specific shade requested by a wealthy patron, or the imperial household was immense. A little more bug juice in vat number 3, please, Wong. And make sure it's the batch from the south-facing insects, they have a better attitude. Here's a quirky tidbit for your sleepy contemplation. Beyond the known chemical interactions, dyers often had their own set of beliefs or rituals. Perhaps a certain dye, say a potent red, was best prepared when Mars was ascendant in the night sky. Or maybe dyers avoided whistling while working with blue indigo vats lest the color turn out uneven. Some might have believed that their own mood on a particular day could subtly influence the vibrancy of the colors they produced. A cheerful dyer for cheerful yellows, a contemplative one for deep blues. While we might dismiss these as mere superstitions today, they speak to a worldview where the craft was deeply intertwined with the rhythms of nature and the human spirit. Of course, the exact range of colors achievable in the truly ancient periods, versus those developed in later dynasties like the Tang or Song, when dyeing reached incredible heights of sophistication, is a subject that historians still debate. Recipes were often kept secret, passed down within families or guilds, and the archaeological evidence for specific dye compounds on ancient textiles can be difficult to analyze definitively. Furthermore, the extent to which sumptuary laws, those strict rules dictating who could wear, which colors and fabrics based on their social rank, were actually enforced in the very earliest dynasties, and what the penalties were for, say, a commoner caught wearing a bit too much imperial yellow, is a topic of ongoing discussion among social historians. As the dyed skeins are finally lifted from their baths, rinsed thoroughly and hung up to dry, they transform the workshop into a breathtaking gallery. Strands of crimson sapphire, emerald, amethyst, and gold drip, slowly the light catching their wet sheen. The air, despite its chemical tang, now also carries the clean, damp scent of washed silk. Each colored thread is a testament to nature's bounty and human ingenuity, a vibrant note ready to be woven into a larger symphony of texture and pattern. These brilliantly hued yarns, now imbued with both the natural luster of silk and the rich colors of the earth, are almost ready for their final destiny on the loom. The transformation is nearly complete. From a tiny egg to a hungry worm, from a mulberry leaf to a silken cocoon, from a raw filament to a strong thread, and now to a vibrant strand of color. The journey has been long and meticulous. Next, these colored threads will meet the weaver's art, where they will finally be interlaced into fabric. Your journey through the gentle art of silk now takes you from the vibrant, dripping skeins of the dye house into a different kind of sensory environment. As you approach the weaving workshop, the first thing that strikes you is the sound. A complex rhythmic symphony of clicks, clacks, thumps, and creaks, all blending into a steady, almost hypnotic cadence. This is the sound of looms at work, the sound of fabric being born, thread by patient thread. The air inside is often filled with fine lint dust motes, dancing in the shafts of light that pierce the dim interior. There's a dry, slightly woody smell from the loom frames mixed with the faint, clean scent of the dyed silk yarns. You settle beside a weaver, perhaps a young woman whose movements are already economical and precise, or an older artisan whose hands seem to know the loom's every secret. The earliest and simplest type of loom you might encounter is the backstrap loom. It's an ingenious device, portable and elegant in its simplicity. One end of the warp threads, the long lengthwise threads, is attached to a fixed object, perhaps a post or a tree, while the other end is secured to a strap that passes around the weaver's lower back. By leaning forward or backward, the weaver can adjust the tension of the warp. Complex patterns can be created on a backstrap loom, but it's a slow, painstaking process, producing relatively narrow bands of fabric. You watch as the weaver deftly manipulates a set of heddle rods to create a shed, an opening in the warp, and then passes a small shuttle holding the weft thread the crosswise thread through it. But China was a hotbed of innovation in loom technology. While backstrap looms and simple horizontal ground looms were used, a truly transformative invention was the horizontal treadle loom. This is a mainstream historical fact of profound significance. China is widely credited with the invention of the sophisticated horizontal treadle loom, possibly as early as the Warring States period, 475-221 BCE, or by the Han Dynasty 206 BCE, 220 CE. This loom was a game changer. It featured foot-operated treadles connected to heddles frames holding sets of warp threads. By pressing the treadles, the weaver could easily raise and lower different combinations of warp threads, creating the shed with their feet. This freed up their hands entirely to pass the shuttle and beat in the weft, dramatically increasing the speed of weaving and allowing for the production of much wider and more complex fabrics. It was without exaggeration a revolutionary piece of technology that would eventually spread across the world, transforming textile production wherever it went. Before any weaving can begin, however, there is the monumental task of warping the loom, preparing and setting up those hundreds, sometimes thousands of parallel warp threads. This is arguably one of the most crucial and time-consuming steps in the entire process. You watch as dyed yarn is taken from bobbins and carefully measured out to the desired length. These threads are then arranged in the correct order and density, often on a large warping frame or mill, before being meticulously transferred to the warp beam at the back of the loom. Each thread must be passed through its designated heddle and then through a slot in the reed, a comb-like device that keeps the threads evenly spaced and is used to beat the weft into place. Warping a loom, especially with fine silk threads, looks like trying to untangle the world's largest, most delicate plate of spaghetti. But if you make one tiny mistake in the sequence or tension, it's not just dinner that's ruined, it's potentially weeks of painstaking work. The slightest error here can cause endless problems during weaving. No pressure, ancient weaver, no pressure at all. Once the loom is warped, the actual weaving can commence. It's a three-part rhythm. Shedding, the weaver operates the treadles or hand-manipulated heddles on simpler looms to raise certain warp threads and lower others, creating an opening, the shed, between them. Picking, the weaver throws or passes the shuttle which holds a bobbin of weft yarn through the shed from one side of the loom to the other. You hear the characteristic clack as the shuttle flies across, beating in. The weaver then uses the reed to firmly press this newly inserted weft thread against the previously woven fabric. The fell. This creates a tight, even weave, and you hear the solid thump of the beater. This sequence, shed, pick, beat, is repeated over and over, thousands upon thousands of times. The fabric grows with agonizing slowness, perhaps only a few inches in a long day if the silk is fine and the pattern complex. The most basic weave structure you see being created is plain weave, also known as tabby. This is a simple over one, under one interlacing of warp and weft, creating a strong, stable fabric. It's the foundation of many textiles. But even with simple looms, weavers could create variations like basket weaves or rib weaves by altering how many threads were picked up or crossed. As loom technology evolved, more complex structures like twills with their characteristic diagonal lines and satins with their smooth, lustrous surfaces created by floating threads over several others became possible, showcasing silk's unique ability to reflect light. The skill of the weaver is paramount. It requires immense concentration to keep track of the pattern, if any to maintain an even beat to ensure the edges of the fabric. The selvages are neat and strong, and to spot and fix any broken threads immediately. These weavers were often deep in the zone. You could probably set off a small firework display right next to them and they wouldn't flinch. Just shed, pick, beat. Shed, pick, beat. They were the original mindfulness practitioners, their minds and bodies completely absorbed in the task at hand. Now, for a quirky little tidbit, weavers often developed an intimate relationship with their looms. Some might have had little rituals or superstitions. Perhaps a small charm like a carved piece of jade or a lucky coin was tied to a part of the loom frame to ensure smooth weaving, protect against broken threads, a weaver's nightmare, or bring good fortune to the finished cloth. Maybe some weavers even talked to their looms, coaxing them through a difficult passage or praising them when the work was going well. In a world where so much depended on the harmonious interaction of human and machine, it's not surprising that looms might have been seen as having their own personalities. The exact period and specific region within China where the highly efficient treadle loom was first developed and perfected is still a subject of scholarly investigation. While the Han Dynasty is often cited earlier, prototypes may have existed. Archaeological finds of loom parts and textile fragments, along with interpretations of ancient textual references, continue to provide clues, but a definitive, universally agreed upon pinpoint for its invention remains elusive. Furthermore, historians debate how rapidly more complex pattern weaving techniques, like those required for early damasks or brocades, which involve intricate control over individual warp threads, evolved and disseminated after the invention of more sophisticated looms. Was there a sudden explosion of complexity or a more gradual refinement of patterning capabilities? You can almost feel the slight vibration of the loom through the floor as the weaver works. You see the newly formed fabric slowly, almost imperceptibly growing, a testament to their dedication. Early attempts at patterned fabrics before full mastery of complex looms might have been wonderfully abstract. Look, it's a blob dragon, or perhaps that's a cloud. Yes, definitely a cloud. A very artistic, slightly lopsided cloud that seems to be winking. But even these simple beginnings held the seeds of the breathtakingly intricate silks that were to come. For now, the gentle, rhythmic beating of the loom fills the air, a sound that has echoed through Chinese history for millennia. It's the sound of creation, of utility and beauty being made manifest from mere threads. These lengths of fabric, still humble in their plainness or simple patterning, are the culmination of an immense journey. Soon they will be cut, sewn, and perhaps further embellished. but the fundamental act of their creation happens here at the loom under the patient hand of the weaver. And as the fabric grows, so too does the story of silk, preparing for even greater displays of artistry and opulence. The rhythmic pulse of the weaver's loom fades slightly as your attention is drawn from the act of creation to the meaning embedded within the newly formed cloth. While plain unadorned silk possessed a beauty and luxury all its own, it was in the intricate patterns and vibrant symbols that the true voice of ancient Chinese silk found its most eloquent expression. You are now drifting through a silent gallery of these textiles, or perhaps watching as a master weaver begins the painstaking process of coaxing a complex design from the threads. The air seems to hum with unspoken narratives. In ancient China, as in many cultures, symbolism was not merely decorative. It was a fundamental way of understanding and interacting with the world. Objects, animals, plants, and even abstract geometric shapes were imbued with layers of meaning, conveying wishes for good fortune, longevity, prosperity, or signifying power status and virtue. Silk, with its smooth surface, its ability to hold vibrant dyes, and its inherent preciousness, became the ultimate canvas for this rich visual language. A robe wasn't just a garment to keep you warm, it was a statement, a walking billboard of your identity, your aspirations, or your place in the cosmic order. Your eyes trace the shimmering threads and mythical creatures begin to emerge. The most potent and revered of these is the dragon, the Long. You see it coiling and undulating across imperial robes, its powerful form rendered in gold thread or deep indigos. The dragon symbolized the emperor, the son of heaven. It represented imperial power, wisdom, protection, and good fortune. Its claws were a specific marker. The five-clawed dragon was strictly reserved for the emperor himself and his highest-ranking family members. If you were anyone but the emperor and got caught with a five-clawed dragon on your PJs, it wasn't just a fashion faux pas. It was more like a fashion fatal pause with potentially dire consequences. Then there is the majestic phoenix, or fenghuang, its plumage a riot of auspicious colors. This elegant creature, often depicted with flowing tail feathers, represented the empress as well as beauty, grace, good omens, and virtue. When dragon and phoenix were shown together, they symbolized a harmonious marriage or the perfect balance of imperial power. The emperor and empress yin and yang. Other fantastic beasts grace the silken surfaces. The qilin, a gentle horned creature often described as having the body of a deer, the tail of an ox, and fish-like scales, was a bringer of serenity, prosperity, and illustrious offspring. Its appearance was considered an incredibly auspicious omen. The tiger, by contrast, exuded raw power and courage. Its image was used not just to signify martial prowess, but also as a potent talisman to ward off evil spirits and protect the wearer. Nature's more familiar inhabitants also carried deep symbolic weight. The crane, with its stately grace, was a powerful emblem of longevity and wisdom, often associated with Taoist immortals. Bats, perhaps surprisingly to Western sensibilities, were highly auspicious because the word for bat, few, is a homophone for the word for good fortune. 5 bats shown together represented the 5 blessings: longevity, wealth, health, love of virtue, and a peaceful death. Butterflies flitted across silk, symbolizing joy, love, summer, and a long life. Pairs of butterflies were a common wedding motif. The fish yu was another homophone, this time for abundance or surplus, making it a popular symbol for wealth and prosperity. The botanical world was equally rich in meaning. The peony, with its lush, extravagant blooms, was known as the king of flowers and symbolized riches, honor, and feminine beauty. The lotus flower, emerging pristine from muddy waters, was a powerful emblem of purity, perfection, spiritual enlightenment, especially in Buddhist contexts in summer. The plum blossom, bravely flowering in the late winter snow, represented courage, resilience in the face of adversity, hope, and enduring beauty. Bamboo, with its straight segmented stalks and evergreen leaves, signified integrity, strength, flexibility, and longevity. Even abstract geometric patterns held significance. Meandering frets known as liwen or thunder patterns could symbolize continuity, the unending cycle of life, or the cosmic order. Spirals, rhombuses, and interconnected lozenges all carried layers of meaning developed over centuries. Auspicious Chinese characters themselves were often woven or embroidered into textiles. The character Shu longevity was ubiquitous, as were few happiness, blessings, and Yi Joy often doubled for weddings as Shuangxi. Some of those robes were so packed with symbols it was like wearing an entire philosophical treatise or a very elaborate good luck charm. Excuse me, noble sir. You might want to whisper, your left sleeve seems to be arguing for longevity and a scholarly career, while your right hem is putting in a strong bid for sudden wealth and many children. That's quite an interesting combination of aspirations you're wearing today. These patterns were achieved through various sophisticated techniques. While simple resist dyeing could create patterns, the true artistry shone in weave patterning. Damasks, Ling, and Chinese featured monochrome designs where the pattern was made visible by the contrasting play of light on different weave structures, typically as satin floats against a plain or twill background. The effect was subtle and elegant. Brocades Jin, on the other hand, were a riot of color and texture. These were created using supplementary weft or warp threads, which were introduced during the weaving process to create the pattern, often in gold or multicolored silks. Brocades were incredibly labor-intensive and highly prized. Later embroidery would elevate silk to another level, with skilled artisans using fine needles and silk floss to create breathtakingly detailed images on already woven fabric. And then there was kesi, or cut silk tapestry, a technique where pictorial designs were woven directly into the fabric, creating sharp outlines, almost like a painting. Each color area was woven with a separate small bobbin, making it incredibly time-consuming but resulting in stunning detailed imagery. The use of these patterns was far from random. This brings us to a crucial mainstream historical fact. Sumptuary laws in ancient China, varying by dynasty but always present, strictly regulated who could wear not just silk itself, but also specific colors and, very importantly, which motifs they were permitted to display. As mentioned, the five-clawed dragon was the emperor's prerogative. Other ranks of nobility and officials had their own prescribed symbols. Perhaps cranes for civil officials, or tigers for military officers with specific numbers or arrangements indicating precise rank. The Mawangdui tombs, dating from the Western Han Dynasty 2nd century BCE, yielded some of the most spectacular early examples of patterned silks, including complex embroideries with flowing cloud-like patterns, mythical creatures, and geometric designs, all preserved in remarkable condition. These finds provide concrete evidence of the incredible artistry and symbolic richness of silk, even at this early period. So these patterns truly were a language instantly communicating a person's status affiliations and even their aspirations, or the occasion they were dressed for, to anyone who could read this complex visual vocabulary. Imagine in your sleepy state trying to decipher it all. You might accidentally wear a robe with a symbol that you thought meant wise and scholarly, but actually meant, I really, really love pickled turnips. To an important imperial meeting. That could be a bit awkward. Though to be fair, pickled turnips are indeed pretty good. Now for a quirky tidbit. It was widely believed that wearing auspicious symbols could actively confer their benefits upon the wearer. A garment embroidered with cranes wasn't just a symbol of longevity. It was thought to promote a long life. Children might wear clothing adorned with tiger motifs, not just because they looked fierce, but because it was believed the tiger's power would actively protect them from harm and malevolent spirits. Weavers themselves might have felt a deep responsibility when creating these potent symbols. Perhaps there was a belief that one had to be in a state of mental purity or focus when weaving a dragon for the emperor, lest any negative thought or distraction somehow diminish the power of the symbol, or even worse, bring ill fortune. The precise origins and early evolution of some of China's most iconic symbols, like the dragon and phoenix, and exactly how they became so deeply embedded in textile art and imperial iconography, are subjects of ongoing iconographic research and historical debate. Scholars trace their development from Neolithic pottery motifs and shamanistic imagery through to their highly codified forms in later dynasties, exploring influences from various regional cultures and philosophical schools of thought. Similarly, historians debate the extent to which complex pattern weaving capabilities particularly for polychrome brocades, diffused across different regions of China, and whether major regional weaving centers developed their sophisticated techniques independently or primarily through the migration of skilled artisans and imperial patronage. The visual complexity is astounding. Your fingers might trace the raised threads of a brocade, feel the smooth coolness of a damask. You can almost imagine the weight and drape of a fully patterned imperial robe, the way it would shimmer and shift with movement, each symbol catching the light, telling its silent story. These were not just clothes, they were wearable art declarations of identity and conduits of power, and it was in the most exclusive, most guarded workshops that these potent symbols were brought to life in their most magnificent forms. As you ponder the meaning woven into every thread, your journey now leads you towards the hushed, high-stakes environment where silk was transformed into the ultimate expression of imperial splendor. The echoes of symbolic language carried on shimmering silk threads now guide you towards the very heart of luxury production in ancient China, the imperial silk workshops. You are no longer in a local weaver's hut or a bustling dye house open to the marketplace. Instead, you find yourself seeking a glimpse into a far more guarded and rarefied world. Getting into an imperial silk workshop back then was probably harder than getting into Fort Knox with nothing but a polite request and a kazoo. If you weren't on the approved list, your guided tour would likely end rather abruptly with a firm escort by some very large, very serious-looking guards. But for tonight's sleepy journey, the usual rules are gently bent. The atmosphere inside is a strange blend of intense, almost silent activity and opulent potential. These guanfu or state-controlled manufactories were not quaint cottage industries. They could be vast, highly organized complexes employing hundreds, even thousands of the most skilled artisans in the empire. Specialized departments would handle every stage of production. The finest reeling of flawless cocoons, the preparation of rare and brilliant dyes, the meticulous drafting of designs by court artists or master weavers, the complex weaving on highly specialized looms, and finally, the exquisite finishing touches of embroidery or tailored garment construction. Secrecy was paramount. The techniques used here, particularly for certain unique weaves, dye recipes, or pattern complexities, were state secrets. The knowledge was too valuable, too integral to the projection of imperial power and prestige to be allowed to disseminate freely. The artisans themselves might live and work within these walled compounds, their skills honed and passed down under strict supervision. The materials used were without exception the best of the best. You see bales of the most lustrous raw silk, sourced from regions known for producing the finest filaments. In the dyeing sections, you would find vats bubbling with colors derived from the rarest and most expensive ingredients, producing hues of unparalleled vibrancy and permanence, reserved exclusively for imperial use. Gold and silver threads painstakingly made by wrapping precious metal leaf around a silk core would be waiting to be woven into dazzling brocades. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Imperial silk workshops were a cornerstone of dynastic power and economy in China for millennia. From the Han Dynasty with its centralized control over many industries through the Tang, Song, Ming, and Qing dynasties, these state-run enterprises ensured a constant supply of the highest quality silk textiles. These silks were not just for clothing, the imperial family and the court. They were crucial for state rituals as lavish gifts to vassal states and foreign envoys, a key component of early diplomacy and trade, and as a way to display the immense wealth and sophistication of the Chinese Empire. For instance, during the Tang Dynasty, 618-907 CE, often considered a golden age for silk-specific government bodies, like the Bureau of Weaving and Dyeing, Jiran Shu, and the Directorate for Imperial Manufactories, Xiaofujian, oversaw the production of these exquisite textiles, and their products were renowned across Asia and even into Europe. Imagine the design process. Designs weren't just whipped up on a whim. They were often dictated by complex ritual requirements, by the specific symbolism appropriate for an imperial birthday, a coronation, a state sacrifice, or a diplomatic gift. Court artists would create intricate patterns which would then be translated by master weavers into loom-ready drafts. Every motif, every color, every placement would be scrutinized for its correctness and auspiciousness. The pressure for perfection was immense. A tiny mistake in weaving an imperial dragon, a slight deviation in the prescribed color for a ceremonial robe. They didn't just unravel it and start again. The Imperial Quality Assurance Department did not mess around. While perhaps not as dire as unraveling the weaver themselves, mistakes could lead to severe punishment, loss of position, or at the very least the costly rejection of many weeks or months of labor. You might see weavers working on incredibly complex looms, perhaps multi-harness draw looms, precursors to the jacquard loom, capable of producing the most intricate brocades jin, where patterns seem to float on the surface, or stunning damasks ling with their subtle self-patterned elegance. Kisi tapestry weavers would be meticulously creating pictorial scenes, their small bobbins flying as they built up images thread by thread so fine they resembled paintings. Other artisans would be producing diaphanous gauzes, sha so lightweight they seemed like colored air, or engaging in painstaking embroidery, adding further layers of richness with stitches as fine as a hair. The amount of silk in these places, the sheer concentration of luxury, is almost overwhelming. It's like if a mythical dragon sneezed pure gold, but the gold was actually bolts of unimaginably beautiful fabric. You just want to gently touch it, maybe even roll in it, but then you'd definitely be tackled by those large guards we mentioned earlier. Here's a quirky tidbit for your consideration. Given the immense value and prestige associated with imperial silks, it's not surprising that tales and legends would spring up around these workshops. There might have been stories of almost legendary weavers who could create designs of such complexity and beauty that they were thought to be divinely inspired. Perhaps rivalries existed between different imperial concubines, each vying to commission the most unique and dazzling silk robes to catch the emperor's eye. It's also conceivable that some looms within the imperial compound, especially those used for the emperor's personal garments or important ritual cloths, were considered to have a kind of spirit or sacredness. These looms might have been given special offerings or treated with particular reverence to ensure they continued to produce flawless and auspicious textiles for the Son of Heaven. Maybe there was even a clandestine system of tiny, almost invisible secret marks woven into the selvage of imperial silks by the weavers. A hidden signature to denote their workshop or even their individual handiwork, a subtle act of pride or identity in an otherwise anonymous system. The degree of artistic freedom versus strict adherence to prescribed designs for artisans laboring within these imperial workshops is a topic that historians continue to explore. While conformity was undoubtedly essential for ritual items and symbols of rank, the sheer innovation and variety evident in surviving textiles suggests that master artisans must have had some scope for creativity, perhaps in interpreting designs or developing new techniques. Furthermore, the precise economic impact of these vast imperial workshops, whether they primarily stimulated the broader silk industry by setting high standards and training artisans, or inadvertently stifled private silk production in some regions by monopolizing the most skilled labor and finest raw materials, is another complex area of ongoing scholarly discussion. Did they create a rising tide that lifted all boats, or did they drain the talent pool for everyone else? The atmosphere in these workshops, despite the number of people, is often depicted as remarkably hushed. The stakes are too high, the work too demanding of concentration for idle chatter. You hear the sophisticated clatter of complex looms, the soft rustle of silk being handled with utmost care, the distant murmur of instructions being given in low tones. The faces of the artisans are intent, their focus absolute. They are the anonymous creators of masterpieces, their names rarely recorded, but their legacy preserved in the breathtaking beauty of the silks that adorned emperors' graced palaces and eventually began to trickle out to a world hungry for their splendor. It is this hunger, this allure of a fabric so fine, so vibrant, so symbolically rich, that will eventually draw silk out from the heart of China across treacherous mountains and vast deserts to captivate distant civilizations. But that sleepy traveler is a story that is just beginning to unwind. The dazzling image of imperial workshops with their hushed efficiency and opulent output begins to shift in your mind. You start to perceive silk not just as an adornment for the powerful or a canvas for breathtaking artistry, but as something with raw, tangible economic muscle. The allure of this fabric, so painstakingly created from mulberry leaf to finished bolt, was so potent that it transcended mere aesthetics and took on a surprising yet vital role in the financial and political life of ancient China. Silk became money. You find yourself now in a bustling marketplace, or perhaps witnessing the meticulous accounting within a provincial treasury, or even observing a diplomatic exchange on the vast windswept plains along China's borders. And in all these places, silk is changing hands not merely as a beautiful textile, but as a recognized medium of exchange, a form of prized tender. It's a slightly mind-bending concept for us, accustomed as we are to metal coins, paper notes, or digital transactions. But in ancient China, particularly during certain dynasties, bolts of silk were as good as gold, sometimes even better. Imagine trying to pay your taxes. You gather your grain, perhaps a few chickens, and then you carefully select a bolt of plain undyed silk, woven to a specific length and width, its quality meeting a certain standard. All right, that'll be 3 chickens, a bushel of rice, and yes, your Imperial Majesty's portion of plain weave silk. Grade A, no blemishes. You can almost hear the tax collector droning. Make sure it's the good stuff, no seconds. The Emperor gets terribly itchy if the thread count is too low. This wasn't just a flight of fancy, it was a reality. This brings us to a significant mainstream historical fact. During several periods in Chinese history, most notably the Tang Dynasty 618-907 CE, but also at other times silk was officially recognized and widely utilized as a form of currency. The Tang government instituted the Zhu system of taxation, where households paid their dues partly in grain, Zhu partly in labor or a commutation fee yong, and partly in textiles, predominantly silk, but also hemp or ramie in areas unsuitable for sericulture, diao. Official salaries, especially for government officials and military personnel, were also frequently paid in bolts of silk. To facilitate this, silk bolts were produced in relatively standardized sizes. For example, a common standard was around 40 chi in length and 2 chi in width. Though the exact value of a chi varied over time, it was roughly a foot. This standardization, even if not perfectly uniform across the vast empire, helped immeasurably in its function as a reliable store of value and medium of exchange. Why silk? It possessed several advantages. Compared to lugging around sacks of grain or heavy strings of base metal coins, for large transactions, bolts of silk were relatively lightweight and had a high value-to-weight ratio. You wouldn't carry a silk wallet, of course. You'd probably need a silk wheelbarrow if you were doing some serious shopping. Just popping down to the market, dear. You might hear an ancient merchant call out, "Don't wait up! I've got 3 bolts of prime white silk to spend on that sturdy new ox, and if there's change, maybe a few yards of that nice ramai for new tunics." While perhaps not as easily divisible as coins for very small everyday purchases for significant transactions, land purchases, wholesale trade dowries, or government payments, silk was incredibly practical. In regions where metal coinage was scarce or where the trustworthiness of local mints was questionable, the intrinsic and universally recognized value of silk made it a preferred currency. Beyond its use in everyday commerce and taxation within China, silk also played a crucial role as a form of tribute, both flowing into and out of the imperial coffers. Provinces renowned for their sericulture would send vast quantities of their finest silks to the capital as part of their annual tax obligations, or as special offerings to the emperor. These shipments would stock the imperial treasuries and provide the raw materials for the imperial workshops you glimpsed earlier, ensuring the court never ran short of its favorite luxury. Even more strikingly, silk was a powerful tool of diplomacy and statecraft, particularly in China's dealings with the nomadic peoples and neighboring states along its extensive borders. While China often received tribute from these groups, items like horses' furs, jade, or exotic animals, it also strategically paid out enormous quantities of silk to them. Groups like the Xiongnu during the Han Dynasty, and later the various Turkic and Uyghur khaganates during the Tang, received regular gifts or subsidies of silk from the Chinese court. These payments were, in essence, a pragmatic way to maintain peace-secure borders or even purchase alliances. Sometimes it was straightforward protection money. Other times it was a complex diplomatic dance where silk smoothed the path for trade or political agreements. Rather than engaging in constant costly warfare to defend thousands of miles of frontier, it was often deemed more economical, if sometimes galling, to keep potentially hostile neighbors placated with generous consignments of silk. The Xiongnu chieftain receiving his annual silk shipment might have turned into quite the demanding customer. More silk, you say? Splendid. But this year tell your emperor I'm rather taken with that trendy new periwinkle blue I saw in a traveling merchant. And make sure the dragons have fewer claws this time. 5 is so last dynasty for us discerning steplords. The Chinese envoys must have had some interesting negotiations. What made silk so uniquely suited for these demanding economic and political roles? Its inherent desirability was key. Everyone from the highest noble to if they could afford it or were permitted it, a commoner appreciated its beauty, comfort, and status. This consistent demand gave it a stable underlying value. Its durability, if properly stored, meant it wouldn't easily spoil like grain. And crucially, for many centuries, China held the monopoly on its production know-how. This control over supply, coupled with high demand, made it an incredibly potent economic instrument. Imagine the imperial treasuries. We often picture vaults overflowing with gold, silver, and jewels. But in ancient China, these treasuries would also have been piled high with mountains of neatly folded silk bolts, a fragrant, rustling fortune. The logistics of transporting, cataloging, and storing these vast quantities of textile wealth without damage from moisture mildew or pests like moths and rodents would have been a significant undertaking in itself. Specialized granaries and storehouses, well ventilated and guarded, were essential. You can almost smell the dry, slightly dusty aroma of aged silk in these vast storerooms, a scent of accumulated wealth and imperial power. Now for a quirky tidbit from the annals of silk economics. There are records and anecdotes that hint at the more unusual sides of silk as currency. Imagine a victorious general wanting to reward his troops extravagantly after a major battle decides to pay them their bonuses entirely in fine silk bolts. Suddenly, the local markets in the garrison town are flooded with soldiers trying to convert their silken riches into more immediately useful goods like wine, food, or entertainment, leading to a temporary chaotic boom in the silk for everything else exchange rate. Or consider officials stationed in remote provinces who received their salaries in silk. If they needed to make small everyday purchases and local merchants were hesitant to make change for an entire bolt of imperial-grade silk, an informal secondary market would spring up where silk could be exchanged perhaps at a slight discount for more common copper coins. There are even tales of gamblers in high-stakes games wagering entire bolts of silk instead of coins. The extent to which the widespread use of silk as currency directly impacted or was itself impacted by the development and circulation of metal coinage systems in different Chinese historical periods is a subject of ongoing numismatic and economic debate among scholars. Were they complementary systems or did they compete? Did a shortage of metal for coinage encourage the use of silk, or did the convenience of silk for large transactions slow the adoption of higher denomination coins? Furthermore, historians still debate the true long-term effectiveness and sustainability of using silk payments to powerful nomadic groups as a consistent strategy for border defense. Some argue it was a pragmatic and flexible diplomatic tool that saved lives and resources that would have been lost in warfare. Others contend that it was an ultimately unsustainable drain on the imperial treasury, a sign of underlying military weakness, and that it only encouraged further demands from these border peoples. Regardless of these debates, the undeniable fact is that using silk as tender had profound implications. It massively incentivized sericulture across the empire as there was a guaranteed government demand for the product. It fueled internal trade networks as silk moved from production centers to tax collection points to imperial storehouses and out to officials and soldiers across the land. It fundamentally shaped China's economic landscape for centuries. You observe a merchant carefully unrolling a bolt of silk, its surface shimmering even in the dim light of his stall. He measures it against a marked rod, its value assessed not just by its beauty, but by its weight, its weave, its official acceptance, as good hard or rather soft currency. The rustle of the fabric as it's folded again is the sound of commerce, of salaries paid, of treaties honored. This intrinsic value, this widespread acceptance of silk as a store of wealth and a medium of exchange, was a crucial factor in what was to come. Because if silk was this valuable within China and to its immediate neighbors, its allure to civilizations further afield who had never seen its like and possessed no knowledge of its earthly origins would be almost irresistible. The stage was being set for silk to embark on its most famous journey, not just as a diplomatic gift, but as a commodity that would define an era of global trade. The sheer economic power and intrinsic desirability of silk, which you saw functioning as currency and tribute within China's sphere, naturally created ripples that extended far beyond its great walls. You feel a shift now, a sense of outward movement, as those first precious threads begin their tentative, perilous journeys westward, seeking new markets and captivating distant imaginations. This wasn't yet the bustling, formalized Silk Road of popular imagination. These were its earliest whispered precursors. Imagine in these very early days, perhaps during the later Zhou or Qin dynasties, or the very beginning of the Han, that some of the silk used for diplomatic gifts to neighboring chieftains, or paid out as subsidies to nomadic tribes along the frontier, didn't just stay with its initial recipients. A Xiongnu leader, having received a magnificent bolt of imperial silk, might trade it onward with another tribe further west for prized horses or jade. Migrating peoples displaced by conflict or seeking new pastures might carry small quantities of silk with them, introducing it to unfamiliar eyes in distant oases. Small-scale border markets would have seen some local exchange a trickle rather than a flood. These were the first almost accidental emissaries of silk's allure. The real organized opening of what we now call the Silk Road, however, is traditionally and famously linked to the Han Dynasty, specifically to the intrepid journeys of an envoy named Zhang Qian. This brings us to a cornerstone mainstream historical fact. In the 2nd century BCE, Emperor Wu of Han dispatched Zhang Qian on a mission not to sell silk but to seek alliances with the Yuezhi people against the formidable Xiongnu, who were a constant threat to China's northern borders. Zhang Qian's initial expedition, starting around 138 BCE, was an arduous odyssey. He was captured by the Xiongnu and held for about 10 years, married a local woman, had children, but never forgot his mission. He eventually escaped and continued westward, reaching Fergana Bactria and Sogdia in modern-day Central Asia. Though he ultimately failed to forge the military alliance, Emperor Wu desired the information he brought back to China after 13 years was transformative. He described sophisticated civilizations, powerful horses, the famed heavenly horses of Fergana, and crucially a keen interest among these Central Asian peoples in Chinese goods, especially silk. This first-hand intelligence was a catalyst for the Han Dynasty to actively pursue trade and diplomatic relations westward, establishing the network of routes that would facilitate the first large-scale, systematic export of Chinese silk. Zhang Qian went looking for military allies and basically stumbled into becoming the world's most legendary and unintentional intercontinental delivery route planner. Bad news, Your Imperial Majesty. You can almost hear him reporting no firm alliance with the Yuezhi. Good news. They and pretty much everyone else out there really want our fluffy silk bathrobes, and they have amazing horses. And so the caravans began to roll. You find yourself now on these nascent pathways, part of a train of Bactrian camels, the two-humped, shaggy beasts perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions, plodding steadily westward. The challenges were almost unimaginable. Towering mountain ranges like the Pamirs, the Roof of the World, and the Tian Shan had to be traversed with narrow, treacherous passes and thin, freezing air. Then there were the vast, terrifying deserts, most notably the Taklamakan, whose name is often chillingly translated as "you go in, you don't come out," or "place of no return." The Taklamakan Desert was basically nature's most emphatic way of saying, are you absolutely sure you want this silk that badly travel advisories? Back then, if they existed, it probably just said Taklamakan don't. Just don't. Unless you enjoy sand in places you didn't know you had. Beyond the natural obstacles, there was the ever-present threat of bandits. eager to plunder the valuable cargo and the sheer isolation of the journey. What made silk worth all this risk and effort? Its incredibly high value to weight ratio was paramount for caravan trade. You could load a camel with a fortune in silk, whereas a similar value in grain or pottery would be impractically bulky and heavy for such long distances. Silk was also relatively durable if kept dry, and its exotic, luxurious nature made it irresistible in the West, where nothing like it existed. For centuries, cultures outside of China had absolutely no idea how silk was actually made. This profound mystery only added to its allure and inflated its price. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, famously and hilariously inaccurately speculated that silk was a downy fleece combed from trees, in a distant land called Ceres, the Roman name for China, meaning land of silk. Bless his inquisitive heart, you can just picture him at a sophisticated Roman toga party, trying to explain the origin of his host's shimmering new garment. Yes, my dear Lucius, this lovely tunic. Exquisite, isn't it? It's tree wool, from the forests of Ceres. Very exclusive, they have to climb very, very tall trees. Other theories involved giant insects or strange colorful birds. The Chinese understandably did everything they could to guard the secret of sericulture, knowing that their monopoly was key to its immense value. You watch the plodding camels, their bells a monotonous soundtrack to the journey. The caravan masters, seasoned by countless trips, navigate by stars, by landmarks, by an almost sixth sense for the terrain. Oases, those miraculous pockets of green and water in the midst of desolation, become vital lifelines, places to rest, replenish supplies and trade. Towns like Kashgar, Samarkand, Bukhara, and Merv would rise to prominence as major hubs along these routes, their bazaars a cacophony of languages and a vibrant exchange of goods and ideas. Silk rarely traveled the entire distance from China to Rome in a single caravan or in the hands of a single merchant. It was a relay trade. Chinese merchants might carry it to Dunhuang or Kashgar. From there, Sogdian traders renowned for their commercial acumen and linguistic skills might transport it across Central Asia to Persia. Parthian or Kushan middlemen could then take it further, eventually reaching Roman traders at the eastern fringes of their empire in places like Syria. At each stage, the silk changed hands and its price increased, accumulating the costs of transport risk and profit. Here's a quirky tidbit for your sleepy mind. While silk robes and hangings were the ultimate luxury items in places like Rome, the nomadic tribes of Central Asia, who were often the first foreign recipients or transporters of Chinese silk, sometimes had different uses for it. Due to its lightness, strength, and insulating properties, they might use bolts of silk not for elaborate clothing, but for lining their yurts, their portable dwellings, making them warmer in winter and cooler in summer. Or they might fashion brightly colored silk into high-status banners and pennants that would flutter dramatically from their horses or encampments, visible symbols of wealth and power on the vast steppes. Imagine a fearsome warrior chief, his yurt, unexpectedly cozy thanks to a lining of imperial Han, dynasty silk originally intended for a delicate court lady. The exact routes and the nature of the very earliest westward flow of silk are subjects that historians still debate. Was it primarily driven by active Chinese imperial export policy from the outset? You hear the scholars murmur in your drowsy state. Or was it more of an incidental trade that grew organically from existing border interactions and the movements of nomadic peoples long before Zheng Qian's formal expeditions? Likewise, the precise network of paths that constituted the earliest Silk Road, and which oases and settlements were most significant during the initial centuries of this transcontinental trade, are subjects of ongoing archaeological investigation and careful textual re-examination, with new discoveries occasionally redrawing parts of the map. The dust of the trail settles on your imaginary traveler's cloak. You can almost feel the grit between your teeth, the weariness in your bones, but also the thrill of carrying such a precious, almost magical cargo. You see a bolt of Chinese silk being unrolled in a Persian marketplace, its luster dazzling eyes that have never beheld such a fabric. The merchant's words in a tongue you don't understand are clearly ones of admiration and desire. The first threads had made their way westward, and the world was hungry for more. This insatiable demand stretching from the oases of Central Asia to the palaces of Rome would not only fuel centuries of trade and cultural exchange, but also spur continued innovation and artistry within China itself, as its weavers and artisans strove to create ever more wondrous silk creations to meet both domestic and international desire. The journey had just begun, and the looms back in the Middle Kingdom were far from silent. The echoes of camel bells and the dusty trails leading west now begin to fade, and your focus is drawn back to the source, to China itself. That burgeoning international demand for its unique textile, coupled with the sophisticated tastes of its own imperial court and wealthy elite, acted as a powerful engine for innovation. You find yourself witnessing an extraordinary evolution in the art of silk weaving as artisans push the boundaries of technology and artistry to create fabrics of ever-increasing complexity and breathtaking beauty. The gentle rhythm of the simple looms you encountered earlier is now augmented by the more intricate clatter of highly advanced machinery. A key development you observe is the increasing sophistication and use of the draw loom. This remarkable invention, a true hallmark of Chinese textile genius, was essential for weaving complex figured silks like brocades and lampas, those fabrics with large flowing, non-repeating or large repeating patterns. While simpler looms could create geometric designs or small motifs, the draw loom allowed for a level of pictorial detail and scale that was previously unimaginable. Its basic principle involved a figure harness, a complex system of cords and lashes, positioned above the main warp. This harness controlled individual warp threads or small groups of them independently. A skilled assistant, often a child or young person called a draw boy or draw girl, would sit atop or beside the loom and at cues from the master weaver below would pull on specific cords of this figure harness. This action lifted the designated warp threads, creating the intricate shed through which the weaver would pass the shuttle with the colored weft. It was slow, painstaking work requiring perfect coordination between the weaver and the draw boy. You can almost hear the call and response the weaver, indicating the next sequence, the draw boy pulling the cords, the shuttle flying, the beater thudding. That draw boy perched up there pulling cords all day, that was the original data entry job, but with a much higher chance of getting yelled at if you pulled the wrong cord for the emperor's new dragon robe. This brings us to a pivotal mainstream historical fact. The invention and continuous refinement of the draw loom in China, certainly in use by the Han Dynasty and reaching extraordinary levels of sophistication, by the Tang 618-907 CE and Song 960-9. CE dynasties represented a monumental technological leap in textile history. It enabled the weaving of incredibly complex, large-scale polychrome patterns that were the envy of the world. This technology, which was a precursor to the much later European jacquard loom, was a closely guarded secret for many centuries and was absolutely fundamental to China's long-standing dominance in the production of luxury patterned silks. Surviving textiles from sites like Dunhuang, part of the Mogao Caves cache, showcase an astonishing array of these sophisticated weaves. Vibrant brocades, intricate damasks, and complex gauzes, dating from these golden ages of Chinese silk. With these advanced looms, Chinese weavers became masters of various complex weave structures. You marvel at the Jin brocades with their rich polychrome designs. These could be warp-faced compound tabbies or twills, or weft-faced compound weaves where supplementary colored wefts were used to create the vibrant patterns, often featuring the auspicious symbols you learned about earlier. Dragons, phoenixes, scrolling floral motifs, and geometric arrangements, frequently incorporating gold-wrapped thread for added opulence. Then there are the elegant ling silks, often translated as damasks or patterned twills. These were typically monochrome, but the patterns were created by the subtle interplay of light on different weave structures such as satin floats, creating a lustrous design against a more matte plain or twill background, or vice versa. The effect was one of understated luxury, the patterns shifting and changing as the fabric moved. You also encounter Shah gauze's fabrics of incredible lightness and transparency. Weaving gauze itself is a challenge, requiring the warp threads to be systematically twisted or crossed to create the open, airy structure. To then weave patterns into these delicate, almost ethereal fabrics required extraordinary skill and specialized looms. These patterned gauzes were prized for summer robes and ethereal veils. And of course, there is Casey silk tapestry, which you may have glimpsed before but now see in its full glory. This technique, as you recall, is not a continuous weft weave. Instead, the weaver uses small individual bobbins for each color area, almost like painting with thread. The wefts are not carried from selvage to selvage, but are interlaced back and forth only where that specific color is needed, creating discontinuous wefts. This results in sharply defined blocks of color and incredibly detailed pictorial designs, landscapes, figures, birds, and flowers that look almost like woven paintings. The term kesi means cut silk or engraved silk, referring to the visual effect of fine slits or cuts between different color areas, though master weavers minimize these. Kesi was incredibly labor-intensive, perhaps the most time-consuming of all Chinese weaving techniques, and was reserved for the most luxurious items like imperial robes, scroll mountings, and decorative hangings. Kesi tapestry weavers were so precise they probably threaded needles in their sleep. Their idea of a quick sketch to show a client was likely a 500-hour miniature silk masterpiece depicting a flock of cranes flying over a misty mountain. While not strictly weaving, the art of embroidery on silk also reached new heights during these periods of innovation, often used to further embellish already exquisitely woven silks, adding another layer of texture, color, and detail with an astonishing array of intricate stitches. Different regions of China often became renowned for their particular silk specialties, developing unique local styles and techniques. For example, Sichuan province, particularly its capital Chengdu, was famous for its vibrant and complex brocades, sometimes called shu brocades. The Jiangnan region around modern Suzhou and Hangzhou, known for its fertile lands and sophisticated culture, became a center for exceptionally fine gauzes, intricate damasks, and later Casey tapestries. This regional specialization contributed to the rich diversity of Chinese silk production. Beyond the mechanical ingenuity of the looms, you appreciate the profound artistry of the weavers and designers. It wasn't just about mastering the technology. It was about the aesthetic sensibility, the skillful interpretation of designs, the harmonious blending of colors, and the flawless execution. Imagine ancient fashion commentators, perhaps court eunuchs or noble ladies with a keen eye for style, critiquing the latest imperial silks. Darling, one might whisper to another at a palace banquet, that particular 5-color cloud and dragon brocade the third concubine is wearing is so last season. Everyone who's anyone is wearing the monochrome flying goose and scrolling lotus damask this year. Honestly, someone needs to update her imperial wardrobe advisor. Get with the times. Now, for a quirky tidbit related to these weaving wonders. There are folktales and legends in China about almost supernaturally skilled weavers. One popular type of story tells of a weaver, often a devoted daughter, or a celestial maiden in disguise who could weave a landscape so incredibly realistic that birds would mistake the woven flowers for real ones and try to land on them. Or the woven stream would seem to murmur with flowing water. While these are romantic fictions, they speak to the immense admiration and almost magical qualities attributed to the highest levels of the weaver's art. Sometimes a deliberate tiny flaw or a unique, almost hidden detail might be woven into a masterpiece by a master weaver not as a mistake, but as a subtle signature, a personal mark known only to them or their workshop, distinguishing their work from all others. The precise dating and the exact evolutionary path of the complex drawloom, particularly how it transitioned from simpler pattern rod systems to a more versatile and intricate figure harness capable of controlling thousands of warp threads individually, is still a subject of intensive study and some debate among textile historians. They meticulously analyze fragmentary textual descriptions from ancient records, rare archaeological discoveries of loom components, and the internal evidence of the woven structures and surviving textiles themselves to piece together this complex technological history. Furthermore, the degree to which master weavers in ancient China were regarded as creative artists in their own right versus highly skilled artisans, merely executing prescribed designs, and how their social status and remuneration varied by historical period, and the level of their skill is an ongoing discussion that seeks to understand their role in society more fully. You stand in awe before a length of silk that seems to shimmer with an inner light, its pattern, a complex dance of dragons, phoenixes, and auspicious clouds rendered in threads of gold and every imaginable hue. The skill, the patience, the artistry embodied in such a piece are almost beyond comprehension. These weaving wonders were the pinnacle of China's textile achievement, the ultimate expression of its culture's love for beauty symbolism and technical mastery. And it was these fabrics, above all others, that fueled the world's centuries-long desire for the treasures of Saros and ensured that the secret of silk, for as long as possible, remained one of the most valuable mysteries on earth. The dazzling vision of those intricate weaving wonders, the brocades and damasks fit for emperors and coveted by distant kings, now leads you to ponder a more intimate aspect of silk's dominion. It wasn't just a marvel of technology or a vehicle for artistic expression. Silk was intrinsically woven into the very social fabric of ancient Chinese society. It served as a powerful, visible marker of one's place in a deeply stratified world, a shimmering uniform that dictated and displayed status, privilege, and obligation. You feel yourself observing not just the creation of silk, but its potent role in organizing humanity. Imagine standing on a busy thoroughfare in a grand dynastic capital, perhaps Chang'an during the Tang Dynasty or Kaifeng during the Song. As people pass by, their clothing speaks volumes before they even utter a word. The lustrous sheen of fine silk, the richness of its color, the complexity of its woven patterns or embroidery. These were not merely matters of personal taste or wealth, but were often rigidly prescribed by law. This is where you encounter the fascinating and sometimes frustrating world of sumptuary laws. Sumptuary laws, a recurring feature in many pre-modern societies, were regulations designed to restrict expenditure and consumption, particularly on luxury goods like clothing, food, and even housing according to one's social rank. In China, these laws had multiple aims. Primarily, they sought to maintain the clear visual distinctions between social classes. The ruling elite scholar officials, landowners, merchants, artisans, and peasants. By controlling who could wear what, the authorities aimed to reinforce the existing hierarchy and prevent the lower classes from usurping the symbols of their superiors, which could be seen as a challenge to social order and stability. There was also a Confucian moral dimension, a desire to promote thrift and discourage excessive extravagance, which was often viewed as decadent and potentially disruptive, and sometimes especially if a resource was perceived as scarce or strategically important. Sumptuary laws could help manage its consumption, though with silk produced so abundantly within China for those permitted to use it, this was less of a concern than maintaining social boundaries. So what exactly did these ancient Chinese sumptuary laws dictate when it came to silk? The regulations could be astonishingly detailed. First and foremost, they often determined who could wear silk at all. During certain periods, commoners, especially peasants and laborers, might be entirely forbidden from wearing silk. Their lot was hemp rami, or perhaps the roughest, undyed forms of wild silk, if available locally. Even if a wealthy merchant could afford fine silk, they might be legally barred from wearing it, or restricted to somber colors and simple weaves to distinguish them from the scholar official class, who were generally ranked higher, despite sometimes having less disposable income. Color, as you've learned, was a critical designator. Imperial yellow was the most famous restriction exclusively reserved for the emperor and his immediate family. If you accidentally spilled a bit of mustard down the front of your plain peasant tunic, and it dried to a shade that looked suspiciously like imperial yellow, you'd probably spend the rest of the day frantically trying to rub it out, with a handful of dirt, terrified of being accused of treason by condiment. Other colors were assigned to different ranks of officials. Purples, reds, blues, and greens often denoted specific levels in the bureaucratic hierarchy, with the brightness and specific hue sometimes further differentiating them. Motifs and patterns were, as you saw in the imperial workshops, another fiercely guarded domain. The five-clawed dragon was the emperor's alone. Specific birds like cranes or golden pheasants were often embroidered onto rank badges or woven into the fabric of robes for different classes of civil officials, while animals like tigers and lions denoted military ranks. The number and combination of these symbols could be minutely prescribed. Imagine the ancient Chinese fashion police, perhaps a stern-faced official from the Ministry of Rights, stopping someone in the street. "Excuse me, citizen, is that a three-clawed pheasant I see upon your humble tunic? My records indicate you are only rated for a two-clawed sparrow with minor floral accents." Citation issued. Next time consult your local sumptuary edict section. 3 subsection B. Even the type of weave and the quality of the silk could be legislated. Intricate brocades, dazzling kisi tapestries, or fine patterned gauzes might be reserved for the nobility, and high officials, while lesser ranks or wealthier commoners, if permitted silk at all, might be restricted to plain weaves or simple damasks. The cut and style of garments, the length of sleeves, the fullness of robes, even the type of headwear and belts could all be subject to regulation according to one's station in life. Furthermore, certain magnificent silk robes and adornments were designated only for specific occasions such as imperial sacrifices, court ceremonies, weddings, or funerals. Their use outside these contexts being a breach of protocol. This brings us to a core mainstream historical fact. Sumptuary laws relating to clothing with silk, being a primary focus, were a persistent and significant feature of Chinese governance from at least the Zhou dynasty circa 1046-256 BCE onwards, becoming particularly elaborate and detailed during prosperous and highly organized periods like the Han Tang Song and Ming dynasties. These laws were not static. They were periodically revised, updated, and with varying degrees of success enforced by imperial decree. For instance, the Tang legal code, Tang Lu Shu, one of the best preserved legal codes from pre-modern China, contained explicit articles detailing dress regulations for officials, commoners, and even Buddhist and Taoist clergy, specifying materials, colors, and adornments appropriate to each. Punishments for violations could range from fines or confiscation of the offending garment to demotion beatings or even more severe penalties for flagrant or repeated transgressions, especially if they touched upon imperial prerogatives. The question of enforcement and violations is fascinating. While the laws were on the books, human nature being what it is, there was always a tension between the desire to maintain rigid social distinctions and the equally strong desire of individuals to display their wealth, taste, or aspirations. Wealthy merchants, though officially lower in the Confucian hierarchy than scholar officials, or even poor farmers, often accumulated considerable fortunes and naturally wished to enjoy the fruits of their labor, including fine silk clothing. This led to a constant cat-and-mouse game, with some attempting to subtly flaunt the rules, perhaps by wearing luxurious silks in less conspicuous ways like fine undergarments, or by using colors that were almost forbidden but not quite. Trying to subtly show off your new, slightly illegal but incredibly soft silk undershirt that no one else could see but you knew was there. That was perhaps the ancient equivalent of having the latest, most expensive smartphone, but keeping it hidden in a really cheap, battered case. The social impact of these laws was profound. They served as a constant visual reinforcement of the class structure, reminding everyone of their place in the societal pecking order. What you wore told the world who you were, or at least who the state decreed you to be. This could limit social mobility as outward display of advancement was curtailed. It could also undoubtedly lead to resentment among those who felt unfairly restricted, or conversely a sense of entitled pride among those permitted the finest silks. For a quirky tidbit, imagine a clever, newly rich merchant who wants to show off his success without overtly breaking the sumptuary laws. Perhaps he commissions a robe of a legally permitted dark, somber color, but has it woven from the most incredibly fine, lustrous silk, so that while the color is modest, the subtle sheen and exquisite drape of the fabric speak volumes about its quality and expense to a discerning eye. Or maybe he hosts a banquet where the food is served on plain earthenware as befits his station, but his serving staff are all discreetly wearing very fine, though plainly colored silk livery. Such subtle subversions were likely common. Another angle might be the existence of an underground fashion scene for forbidden patterns or colors. A particular shade of blue officially reserved for third-rank officials might become a secretly coveted color among ambitious young scholars, worn only in private gatherings. a sartorial whisper of rebellion or aspiration. Naturally, the actual effectiveness and consistency of enforcement of these sumptuary laws across the vast expanse of China through different historical periods and among various social strata remain a subject of energetic scholarly debate. Some historians pointing to official edicts and records of punishments argue for relatively widespread compliance, especially in urban centers and among the official class. Others highlight evidence from literature, personal correspondence, and even tomb figurines, suggesting that evasion was common, particularly in frontier regions or during periods of weaker central authority, and that enforcement was often selective targeting conspicuous offenders rather than every minor infraction. Furthermore, to what extent sumptuary laws merely reflected existing social norms and economic realities versus actively shaping them is a complex chicken and egg question that continues to be discussed by social historians of China. Did the laws create the distinctions or simply codify distinctions that were already there? It's also worth remembering as you drift in this sleepy contemplation that sumptuary laws weren't limited to just clothing. They often extended to the size and style of one's house, the number of horses and carriages one could own, the lavishness of banquets and celebrations, especially weddings and funerals, and even the type of coffin and grave goods permitted. Silk, being such a versatile and prestigious material, would often feature in these other restricted displays as well. Luxurious silk wall hangings, elaborate silk beddings, ornate silk funeral shrouds, and banners all governed by the same principles of rank and privilege. You can almost feel the weight of these regulations, the constant awareness of what your clothing signified. A grand court ceremony would have been a dazzling spectacle, not just of wealth, but of meticulously ordered hierarchy. Each official a walking, rustling embodiment of their specific rank, communicated through the color fabric and symbols of their silk robes. The subtle rustle of a high minister's intricately brocaded gown would sound entirely different from the stiff rustle of a minor official's simpler silken worlds. Away from the silence of a peasant's rough hempen tunic, this rigid social structure, so clearly demarcated by silk, paradoxically fueled both immense internal stability. Everyone knew their place, and a powerful internal desire. The aspiration for the silks, and therefore the status that lay just out of reach. This internal pressure, combined with the ever-growing external hunger from distant lands that you witnessed earlier, created an almost unsustainable tension around the precious secret of sericulture. Sooner or later, something had to give. The desire to possess and control this magical thread was simply too strong, both within and without China's borders, for the secret to remain locked away forever. The air around you still shimmering with the legacy of imperial silks, and the rigid social structures they defined now grows thick with an almost palpable tension. For millennia, China had held one of the world's most valuable secrets close to its chest, the intricate magical process of sericulture. This monopoly was not just a source of immense economic power, allowing it to dictate terms in trade and diplomacy. It was a profound point of cultural pride, a testament to Chinese ingenuity, and its unique relationship with the natural world. You can feel the immense effort that went into guarding this treasure. Strict imperial edicts forbade the export of silkworm eggs, cocoons, or mulberry seeds. Border controls, as much as they could be enforced along thousands of miles of often remote frontiers, would have been on high alert for any attempts at smuggling these tiny, precious biological assets. The punishment for anyone caught trying to spirit away the secrets of silk production was often death. This wasn't just about protecting a trade advantage. It was about safeguarding a cornerstone of Chinese identity and imperial prestige. Yet, as you've seen, the allure of silk was simply too powerful, the desire to understand and replicate its creation too intense for the secret to remain locked away indefinitely. Sooner or later, the silken curtain had to twitch. And twitch it did not through a single grand gesture, but through a series of daring acts of espionage, legendary tales of intrigue, and the slow, persistent diffusion of knowledge. You find yourself now a silent observer to these clandestine operations, these moments when the carefully guarded knowledge began to slip through China's grasp. Perhaps the most famous, almost romanticized story of this transmission concerns a Chinese princess. Legend has it that sometime in the early centuries CE, The dates are debated ranging from the 1st to the 5th century. A Chinese princess was betrothed to the king of Khotan, a vital oasis kingdom in the Tarim Basin along one of the main Silk Road arteries. Knowing that Khotan lacked silk, and that she would miss its luxurious feel and perhaps wanting to secure her own position in her new home, she ingeniously smuggled silkworm eggs and mulberry tree seeds out of China by hiding them in her elaborate headdress or within the voluminous folds of her hair. Customs officials, however thorough, would have been unlikely to so intimately search a royal princess on her way to a politically important marriage. That princess with her fabulous contraband-filled hairdo, talk about a high-stakes beehive. One wrong tilt of her head during the border inspection. One overly curious gust of wind. And it's goodbye royal marriage. Hello very serious international incident and a rather sticky imperial inquiry. But as the story goes, she succeeded and thus sericulture was established in Khotan, creating a new independent center of silk production right on China's western doorstep. Another equally renowned, though perhaps more historically verifiable account tells of how silk production reached the Byzantine Empire in the west. Around 552 CE, during the reign of Emperor Justinian I, two Nestorian monks, or perhaps missionaries disguised as monks, their true allegiances, a matter of some historical debate, arrived in Constantinople. They had spent considerable time in China, or possibly Sogdia, where Chinese silk culture was already established, and had learned the intricate secrets of sericulture. They reportedly approached Emperor Justinian with a daring proposition they could procure the means for Byzantium to produce its own silk. According to the historian Procopius, these monks smuggled silkworm eggs out of Serinda, likely Khotan or another silk-producing region, influenced by China, by concealing them within their hollow bamboo walking canes. Those monks with their unassuming bamboo canes, they were the original quiet professionals, the secret agents of agricultural transfer. You can almost picture them, licensed to spill the silkworm beans. Emperor Justinian eager to break the Persian monopoly on importing Chinese silk Persia. Being Byzantium's great rival, must have been intrigued. Bugs in a stick, you say, this had better be good. Gentlemen, the imperial budget for espionage is rather tight this fiscal year. The mission was a success, and with these smuggled eggs, a Byzantine silk industry was born, fundamentally altering the luxury trade in the Mediterranean world. Long before silk reached Byzantium, however, the secret had already made its way to China's closest neighbors. Sericulture likely spread to Korea sometime between 200 BCE and 200 CE, perhaps through Chinese migrants, or envoys during periods of close contact, or even as a result of Chinese commanderies established on the Korean peninsula. From Korea, or possibly directly from China, the knowledge then traveled to Japan traditionally around the 2nd or 3rd century CE, with Japanese legends often crediting specific immigrant families or individuals from the Korean kingdom of Silla, or directly from China, with introducing silkworms and mulberry cultivation. This brings us to a crucial mainstream historical fact. While the dramatic stories of princesses and monks capture the imagination, the spread of sericulture knowledge and viable silkworm eggs out of China was a gradual process that occurred over several centuries and along multiple routes. It moved eastward to Korea and Japan, southward into parts of Southeast Asia, and westward along the Silk Road to Central Asian kingdoms like Khotan, and from there further into Persia, India, and eventually the Byzantine Empire in the mid-6th century CE. Each transmission effectively chipped away at China's millennia-long monopoly on the raw materials of silk production. Those little silkworm eggs, unassuming and seemingly insignificant, were in fact the most potent international spies imaginable. No tiny trench coats, no miniature sunglasses, just pure unadulterated economic disruption, patiently waiting to hatch in foreign lands. The consequences of the secret slipping out were, of course, profound. As other nations began to cultivate their own silkworms and mulberry trees, they started to produce their own raw silk. This didn't mean the end of China's silk industry, far from it. Chinese silk, particularly the highly patterned and technically sophisticated varieties, often remained the most prized for its quality, artistry, and prestige. However, the nature of the Silk Road trade began to change. There was less reliance on China as the sole source for raw silk, though it continued to be a major exporter of both raw silk and finished textiles. New centers of silk weaving emerged, each developing its own styles and specialties, further enriching the global tapestry of silk. Imagine the sheer audacity of these early acts of industrial espionage. The risks were enormous, but the potential rewards, establishing a domestic silk industry, gaining economic independence, acquiring immense prestige, were equally vast. Consider the meticulous planning that must have gone into hiding those tiny eggs, keeping them viable during long and arduous journeys, and then successfully nurturing them in a new, unfamiliar environment. For a quirky or perhaps slightly unsettling tidbit, think about the punishment, not just for the human smugglers, but metaphorically for the silkworms themselves, if an escape attempt was thwarted. Chinese officials discovering a cache of carefully hidden cocoons or mulberry seeds at a border crossing might not have just confiscated them. In an era where symbolism and omens were taken very seriously, such a discovery might have been seen as a bad omen, an attempt by foreign barbarians to steal China's essence. The offending naturalia might have been ceremonially destroyed, perhaps burned, or cast into a river to neutralize any perceived ill fortune, or to make a powerful statement about the inviolability of China's secrets. One can almost imagine a mock trial for the traitorous silkworms. The precise dates, the exact routes, and even the primary actors involved in the transmission of sericulture to specific regions, particularly to Korea, Japan, and various parts of India, are still subjects of lively scholarly discussion and some uncertainty. Legends abound, historical texts can be ambiguous or contradictory, and archaeological evidence, while sometimes providing clues like ancient loom parts or silk fragments, doesn't always tell the full story of how the knowledge arrived. Similarly, historians debate the immediate economic impact on China once its absolute monopoly on raw silk production was definitively broken by Byzantine sericulture. Was it a sudden economic shock leading to a crisis in the Chinese silk export market? Or was it a more gradual adjustment as global silk production slowly ramped up, while Chinese finished silks with their superior quality and design continued to command high prices and prestige for many more centuries? You can almost feel the clandestine excitement, the hushed whispers, the carefully concealed bamboo tubes, or the secret compartments in a princess's elaborate coiffure. The secret was a living thing, a tiny dormant spark of potential, carried across mountains and deserts, nurtured by hope and ambition. Each successful act of transmission was a pinprick in the dam of Chinese secrecy, and eventually the waters of knowledge began to flow outwards, transforming the textile landscape of the world. The monopoly was broken, the secret was out. But the story of silk, far from ending, was simply entering a new, more global chapter. The lustrous threads, now taking root in new lands, would continue to weave their magic, influencing art, culture, and economies far beyond their Chinese birthplace. And it is to this enduring, widespread legacy that our sleepy journey now turns. The secret of sericulture, once so jealously guarded, is now out in the world, carried on the winds of ambition, diplomacy, and intrigue. You feel a sense of expansion as the knowledge takes root in new soils, tended by new hands. Yet this diffusion, this sharing of the great mystery, did not diminish the allure of silk itself. If anything, it broadened its empire, weaving its lustrous threads into the cultural and artistic tapestry of civilizations across the globe. Tonight, as our long journey through its gentle history nears its end, we reflect on this enduring legacy. Silk, even when its production was no longer an exclusively Chinese miracle, retained its almost mystical status. Its intrinsic qualities, that unparalleled sheen, its soft, caressing touch against the skin, its surprising strength for such a delicate fiber, its ability to take dyes with such brilliance, and the way it drapes and flows like liquid light, ensured its continued reign as the queen of textiles. Silk is like that timeless celebrity who, even after decades in the spotlight and countless new ingenues appearing on the scene, still turns heads on. Every red carpet still commands attention, still looks utterly effortlessly fabulous. Other fabrics have their fleeting moments of fame, their fashionable seasons, but silk, it seems, is forever. As sericulture spread, each culture that embraced it didn't just replicate Chinese methods. They adapted them and fused them with their own artistic traditions and created new expressions of silken beauty. In the Byzantine Empire, imperial workshops, much like those you glimpsed in China, produced magnificent heavy silks often dyed in rich Tyrian purple if they could get it, or deep blues and crimsons. Their designs were bold and majestic, frequently featuring powerful Christian iconography, imperial eagles, lions, and other symbols of state power, often enclosed in large roundels. A motif itself perhaps borrowed from Sasanian Persia. These Byzantine silks became incredibly sought after in medieval Europe, used for royal regalia, church vestments, and as precious diplomatic gifts. Sasanian Persia, which had long been a crucial intermediary in the silk trade between China and the West, developed its own highly sophisticated silk weaving industry, probably from the 3rd to 7th centuries CE. Sasanian silks are renowned for their strong symmetrical designs, particularly their iconic motifs of confronted animals. Senmerv's griffins, winged horses, boars often contained within pearl-bordered roundels. These designs were so powerful and aesthetically pleasing that they were not only exported westward but also found their way back eastward, influencing Chinese textile patterns during the Tang Dynasty in a fascinating cross-cultural exchange. Imagine a Roman noble already impressed by Chinese silks encountering a Sasanian silk for the first time. By Jupiter, Darius, where did you get that absolutely fabulous lion roundel cape? My old laurel wreath suddenly feels so last season. It was the ancient world's version of high-stakes fashion Instagram envy. The Islamic world inheriting and expanding upon Sasanian and Byzantine traditions from the 7th century onwards became a vibrant hub of silk production and innovation. From Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus across North Africa, Egypt, Syria, Persia, and Central Asia, weavers created an astonishing variety of silks. A particular feature was the Tairaz band, an embroidered or tapestry-woven inscription often in Kufic script, usually containing the ruler's name titles or religious formulae typically found on robes of honor. Intricate geometric patterns, complex arabesques, and masterful calligraphy became hallmarks of Islamic silk design. Great cities like Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and later Granada in Spain became famous for their luxurious silks. Eventually, the knowledge of sericulture reached medieval Europe. Italy, particularly cities like Lucca, Venice, Florence, and Genoa, emerged as a major center for silk weaving from around the 12th and 13th centuries. Initially, Italian weavers often imitated Byzantine and Islamic designs, but during the Renaissance, they developed their own distinctive and opulent styles, featuring large flowing patterns of pomegranates, artichokes, acanthus leaves, and velvet effects. Later from the 17th century onwards, France, especially the city of Lyon, became the dominant force in European silk production. Renowned for its exquisite designs, technical innovations, and fashionable silks that clothed the courts of Europe. This brings us to a broad mainstream historical fact. The diffusion of sericulture from its Chinese hearth, starting in the early centuries CE, and becoming widespread after its establishment in the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, catalyzed the independent development of vibrant and distinct silk industries across Eurasia. These new centers, including Persia, the vast Islamic caliphates, and eventually medieval and Renaissance Europe, skillfully adapted Chinese technology and aesthetic principles, fusing them with local artistic traditions and needs. This cross-pollination created an incredibly rich and diverse global heritage of silk art, with China itself often continuing to be a major producer and a source of ongoing inspiration, even as its absolute monopoly on raw material had ended. Silk's legacy extends far beyond just clothing and decorative hangings. In East Asia, it became the preferred ground for painting and calligraphy. The smooth, absorbent surface of specially treated silk was ideal for the nuanced brushstrokes of scholar artists and calligraphers, and the scroll format, whether hand scroll or hanging scroll, is intimately linked with the use of silk as a substrate and as a decorative mounting. In the realm of religion, silk has been and continues to be used for sacred vestments, altar cloths, temple banners like the magnificent thankas of Tibetan Buddhism, and for wrapping or preserving holy scriptures across many faiths that encountered it. And its practical uses, though less glamorous, also continued high quality fishing line strings for musical instruments, and in more modern times, early parachutes and significantly surgical sutures where its strength and biocompatibility were prized. Now they're even researching silk proteins like fibroin and sericin for advanced medical applications like tissue engineering and for cosmetics. Soon your fancy anti-aging serum might proudly list essence of highly ambitious caterpillar cocoon or eau de silkworm boudoir as a key ingredient. Progress. The technological innovations spurred by silk production, particularly the development of the draw loom in China and its eventual evolution into the jacquard loom in 19th century Europe, had a profound impact on the entire textile industry, allowing for the automated production of complex patterns in all types of fibers, not just silk. And of course, the Silk Road itself, that vast network of trade routes for which silk was the primary namesake and initial driving force, facilitated far more than just the exchange of goods. It became a vital conduit for the transmission of ideas, technologies, languages, religions like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, artistic motifs, and cultural practices across continents, fundamentally shaping the development of civilizations. For a quirky tidbit to gently mull over, consider the incredible resilience of silk. Archaeologists have unearthed silk fabrics from ancient tombs like those at Mawangdui in China, or from Egyptian graves along the Roman trade routes that are thousands of years old yet have retained a surprising degree of their strength and even their color. These silent witnesses surviving millennia of burial speak volumes about the quality of the fiber and the skill of the ancient artisans who crafted and dyed them. Next time you're in a museum peering through protective glass at a tiny, fragile fragment of ancient silk, take a moment to remember the journey. All those dedicated mulberry farmers, the meticulous silkworm rearers, the empress with her teacup, the princess with her secret-laden headdress, the monks with their hollow canes and countless unnamed weavers at their looms. It took a whole civilization and later a whole lot of determined industrial espionage and patient adaptation to bring that shimmering shred of history to you. There is naturally ongoing scholarly discussion about many aspects of silk's vast legacy. For instance, the extent to which the Silk Road was a balanced conduit for the reciprocal transmission of ideas and cultural influences between East and West, versus being a route where influences predominantly flowed from more established or technologically advanced centers like China and Persia outwards towards other regions, is a complex and perennially debated question among historians and archaeologists. Similarly, assessing the precise end of China's undisputed global dominance in the silk market is a nuanced affair. While its raw material monopoly was broken by the 6th, 7th centuries CE, its production of exceptionally high quality, artistically innovative finished silks continued to hold significant prestige and market share for many more centuries. And historians debate the key turning points and regional variations in this long, gradual global shift. Even today, in our world of synthetic wonders and fast fashion, the words 100% silk on a label still evoke a certain thrill, a whisper of timeless luxury and elegance, don't they? It's as if the fabric itself is whispering, I'm special, I'm fancy, and I have a very, very long and rather dramatic backstory involving emperors, goddesses, intrepid spies, and a whole lot of very hungry caterpillars. And so the story of silk, which began with a legendary empress and a chance discovery, has woven itself through the millennia across continents and into the very fabric of human civilization. Its lustrous threads have adorned emperors and empresses, graced sacred altars, carried artistic visions, and even paid taxes. It launched epic journeys, built fortunes, and toppled monopolies. It is a story of meticulous patience, of breathtaking artistry, of guarded secrets, and of enduring beauty. From the gentle rustle of mulberry leaves to the rhythmic clatter of the loom, from the shimmer of a finished robe to the faint scent of history it carries, remains a testament to the extraordinary partnership between nature's humblest creatures and humanity's most ambitious ingenuity. Our exploration of its gentle art in ancient China is now drawing to a soft, quiet close. The vibrant colors of the dye vats begin to fade into softer hues in your mind's eye. The rhythmic clatter of the looms softens, becoming a distant, soothing beat like a gentle heartbeat slowing for rest. The bustling workshops grow still the diligent hands of artisans now at peace. Imagine the last threads being carefully tied off the final patterns completed, as a deep tranquility settles over the ancient world we've journeyed through. The weight of history once so vivid now feels light, like the finest silk gauze drifting on a warm evening breeze. You can let go of the details, the names, the dates, and just retain the feeling. The soft, smooth glide of silk, the quiet dedication of its makers, the timeless beauty they created. The journey has been long stretching across centuries, across vast landscapes of the mind, but now it's time for your own quiet repose. The path back to your own peaceful awareness is clear and easy. The stories have been told, the images have softened, and all that remains is the gentle echo, a whisper of ancient looms and rustling silk, lulling you, comforting you. Allow yourself to drift now, unencumbered, on this soft current of relaxation deeper and deeper into serene stillness. The lights are very dim now. The fans hum a distant lullaby, and the world outside this peaceful moment simply fades away. End of script. Sweet dreams.